Before we begin, a brief word. The data tells us that nearly 80% of those who watch these accounts have not yet subscribed. If these chronicles resonate with you, if the silence between the words keeps you listening, consider subscribing. It costs nothing, and it ensures you'll be here when the next account surfaces. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're listening from. And if you've seen something you can't explain, we want to hear about it. Now, let us begin. I work as a contract pilot for a federal weather service based out of Fairbanks. Most of my assignments are concentrated between October and March, when the remote research stations near the top of the world require supplies and when scientists working the North Slope need to observe ice conditions that cannot be measured from the ground. I have been flying regularly to the northernmost settlement in the state, a place the Inupiat call Utqiagvik, for nearly 8 years. I know the most important landmarks in this region, the way a person knows the furniture in a room they've lived in for decades. The bend in the Colville River, which I liken to a mirror laid flat across the tundra. The old DEW line station, visible from altitude as a dark smudge on the otherwise featureless snow. The pressure ridges lining the Arctic coastline like broken teeth forced upward by the slow, grinding patience of the sea ice. I thought I knew the sky there as well as I know the street in front of my own house. I was wrong. I'm 41 years old. I grew up in Anchorage, learned to fly in my 20s, and accumulated enough winter hours in small aircraft to understand a fundamental truth about the Arctic that no amount of experience can fully insulate you from. The far north doesn't care about your confidence. It doesn't care about your hours logged, your instrument ratings, your intimate knowledge of its landmarks and its moods. It simply waits. And when it decides to show you something, you are not consulted beforehand. My co-pilot on the route I'm about to describe was a woman I'll call the co-pilot. She was 10 years younger than me, sharp, methodical, and composed under pressure. She'd spent 3 seasons flying cargo to remote villages across western Alaska before we were paired together, and she had the kind of quiet competence that makes you trust someone without needing to discuss it. She wasn't easily rattled. That mattered. It mattered more than I understood at the time. It was early February. We were scheduled for a standard supply drop to the atmospheric research station just east of Utqiagvik. 2 pallets of equipment, some sensor arrays that needed installation before the next storm cycle, and a single passenger, a graduate researcher heading north to collect data for his thesis. Young. Focused. The kind of person who reads paperbacks under dome lights and doesn't look out the window unless something demands his attention. The weather forecast was marginal but workable. Winds at 15 knots, visibility 5 miles, light snow, ceiling at 1,200 feet. Cold but stable. We'd flown through worse conditions on this route and thought nothing of it. We departed Fairbanks at 6:47 in the morning. The sky was still dark, completely, utterly dark, the way it gets at that latitude in February, when the sun offers maybe 4 hours of weak, diluted daylight around solar noon and the rest is a long, patient gradient between black and the deepest shade of blue. We climbed to 8,500 feet and settled into the cruise. Our aircraft was a Twin Otter, a machine built for punishment, reliable in conditions that would ground anything less stubborn, with the kind of honest, workmanlike character that makes you feel the engineering in every vibration of the airframe. The co-pilot handled the radio checks while I trimmed for the wind. The graduate researcher sat in the cargo area behind us with his headset on, reading his paperback under a small cone of yellow light. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look concerned. He was cargo that happened to be breathing. 2 hours into the flight, we crossed the Brooks Range. The peaks below us were smooth domes of white, ancient mountains worn down to their bones by millennia of ice and wind, with ridge lines that cut sharp shadows across the snow even in the dim, angled light of the Arctic winter. The co-pilot checked the fuel. We were on schedule. The heater worked. The engine sounded clean, that particular rhythm of twin turboprops running in harmony, a sound that becomes so familiar it functions as a kind of silence. It was the kind of flight where you let your mind go quiet and simply watch the instruments and the horizon. Where the world outside the glass is so vast and so empty that your consciousness contracts to the small, warm space of the cockpit and the steady pulse of the machine carrying you through it. Then the aurora started. I've seen the northern lights more times than I can count. They are part of the job when you fly at night in high latitudes. Green curtains, sometimes red or purple, rippling across the sky like silk caught in a slow-motion breeze. Beautiful, certainly. But also predictable. They follow magnetic field lines. They pulse. They shift. They move with a kind of organic fluidity that, once you've seen it enough times, becomes as familiar and unremarkable as weather. What showed up ahead of us didn't move like that. It started as a band of pale green stretching east to west across our nose. Normal enough. The aurora often presents as a broad ribbon spanning the horizon, and this looked exactly like every other display I'd seen from the cockpit at 8,000 feet on a winter night above the Brooks Range. But then the band stopped rippling. The motion ceased. The entire structure locked in place as though someone had pressed pause on a projection, the silk frozen mid-billow, every fold and gradient arrested in absolute stillness. And inside that frozen band, a white line appeared. Not a streak. Not a tail. Not the fading remnant of something that had passed. A line. Perfectly straight, perfectly horizontal, thin as a pencil mark drawn on black paper, but bright enough to make me squint. It sat motionless inside the aurora, suspended roughly 10 degrees above the horizon, and it did not waver. Not a millimeter. Not a fraction of a degree. It held its position with the kind of precision that nature does not produce. "You seeing that?" the co-pilot asked. "I see it," I said. I checked the GPS. We were 127 miles north-northwest of the Colville River. The line sat roughly on our heading, directly ahead, as though it had been placed there specifically for us to fly toward. I thought briefly that it might be a reflection off the windscreen, an artifact of the instrument lighting catching the glass at the wrong angle. So I shifted in my seat. The line didn't move with me. It stayed fixed against the sky, independent of my perspective. I glanced at the side window. It was there, too. Same angle, same brightness, same absolute stillness. The co-pilot leaned forward and pointed. "What is that?" "A contrail. At that altitude," I said. "And frozen in place?" Contrails don't sit still. They drift and spread and dissolve as the wind carries them. They're transient by nature, signatures of passage, not permanent fixtures. This thing looked like someone had drawn it on the sky with a ruler and a piece of white chalk. A single, impossibly clean line suspended in the arrested aurora, and nothing about it suggested it was going anywhere. I kept my hand on the yoke and my eyes forward. The autopilot was engaged, but I wanted to be ready. Ready for what, I couldn't say. I just knew that my hands belonged on the controls and my attention belonged on that line. The graduate researcher noticed. He pressed his face to the window and pulled his headset mic close to his mouth. "Is that part of the aurora?" "We're not sure," the co-pilot said. The line didn't fade. It didn't drift. It didn't do any of the things that lights in the sky are supposed to do when you watch them long enough. It just hung there while we closed the distance, our twin otter eating the miles between us and whatever occupied that fixed point in the frozen aurora ahead. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The radio had gone quiet. Not just quiet, silent. No static. No carrier wave hum. No background chatter from other aircraft or distant ground stations. Just a void where sound should have been, an absence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I keyed the mic, Fairbanks radio, Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot, radio check. Nothing. Dead air. Not even the click of my own transmission reflecting back. I tried again. Same result. The frequency was open, the equipment was powered, but the radio had become a one-way door that led nowhere. The co-pilot reached over and cycled the primary radio. The display blinked, reset, and came back showing normal frequency settings. She keyed her mic, Barrow Tower, Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot. "How do you read?" Silence. I checked the backup radio. Dead air on that one as well. Not static, not interference, just an empty channel, the kind of hollow quiet that puts a knot in your stomach because it means the machine is working but the world on the other end has stopped answering. In 8 years of flying this route, I had never lost all radio contact simultaneously. Equipment fails, that's aviation. Frequencies get crowded, transmissions step on each other, atmospheric conditions degrade signal quality. Those things happen. But both radios going silent in clear air, at cruise altitude, on a route I'd flown hundreds of times, that doesn't happen. That's not a malfunction. That's an absence. We still have NAV? I asked. The co-pilot tapped the GPS screen. It flickered. The position jumped south by several miles, then snapped back north, then froze. The altitude reading cycled wildly, 8,500 feet, then 14,200, then 2,100. The numbers changing in the span of 3 seconds with the frantic randomness of a system receiving data it couldn't process. None of those numbers were real. We hadn't climbed. We hadn't descended. We were exactly where we'd been, doing exactly what we'd been doing. I glanced at the standby altimeter. It showed 8,250 feet. Steady. The attitude indicator was level. Airspeed held at 135 knots. The magnetic compass pointed north. Everything analog was functioning perfectly. Everything digital was dying. The white line ahead of us began to rotate. Slowly at first, a measured, deliberate motion, like the hand of a clock sweeping across a dial. It tilted from horizontal to a shallow angle, perhaps 15 degrees. Then it straightened. Then it tilted the other way. The motion was smooth and mechanical, no wobble, no drift, no organic irregularity. It moved with the precision of something engineered, something operating according to instructions. Grant, the co-pilot said. She used my call sign, the name I'd given her for cockpit communication. Her voice had an edge I didn't like. The kind of edge that meant her training was holding, but her instincts were screaming. I see it. The line stopped rotating and held a new position, angled slightly upward, as though pointing at something above and ahead. And then, without warning, it moved toward us. Not like an aircraft. Not like anything that has to push through atmosphere or obey the relationship between thrust and drag. 1 second it was 10 degrees above the horizon. The next second it was 20 degrees. Then 30. It closed the distance between us without crossing the intervening space. It didn't travel through the sky. It simply appeared closer each time I blinked, as though the distance itself were being edited, subtracted, erased frame by frame. My hands tightened on the yoke. Should we turn? The co-pilot asked. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to bank hard and get us off our heading immediately. The reflex of a pilot who sees something closing on his aircraft and wants to create separation. But another part of me, the part that has kept me alive in bad weather, in whiteout conditions, in situations where visibility drops to zero and the only thing between you and the terrain is your discipline, that part told me to hold course. Don't make sudden moves when you don't understand what you're dealing with. Don't react until you know what you're reacting to. The line stopped. It sat directly ahead of us, maybe 2 miles out, maybe less. Distance was impossible to judge against something with no reference point, no context, no familiar scale. The aurora around it pulsed once, a single, bright flare of green, and then faded to a dull, sickly glow, as though the energy that sustained the display had been drawn away, consumed by whatever occupied that fixed point in the sky. The line remained. Then the air around us changed. I felt it before I saw it. A pressure drop, sudden, physical, unmistakable. My ears popped. The cabin seemed to contract. And the temperature inside the cockpit fell. Not gradually, the way it does when a heater cycles or a seal leaks. Fast. I watched the temperature gauge on the environmental panel drop from 68 degrees to 52 in the span of maybe 10 seconds. Frost formed on the inside edge of the windscreen, crystalline patterns spreading across the glass like something was breathing on it from the other side. I could see my own breath, white plumes hanging in the suddenly frigid air of what should have been a heated, pressurized cockpit. What the hell? the graduate researcher said from the back. His voice came through the intercom thin and startled. The engines stuttered. Both of them, a simultaneous hiccup in the rhythm, a brief falter in the steady drone that had been our constant companion for 2 hours. I glanced at the fuel flow indicators. They dipped, wavered, then recovered. The manifold pressure gauges trembled. I pushed the throttles forward slightly to compensate, feeding the engines more fuel, more air, more of whatever they needed to keep turning. They caught and smoothed out. The rhythm returned. Then the line split. It didn't break apart. It didn't scatter or fragment. It divided, cleanly, precisely, the way a cell divides under a microscope. One line became 3, each one identical in brightness and thickness, and the 3 lines arranged themselves into a perfect equilateral triangle, points up, rotating slowly around a center point that I couldn't see but could feel existed, a gravitational center, an axis of intent. "We need to turn," the co-pilot said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. I could hear the effort. "Agreed," I said. I disengaged the autopilot and banked left, a smooth 30-degree turn to take us off the heading. Away from the triangle. Away from whatever geometry was assembling itself in the sky ahead of our aircraft. The triangle rotated faster. The lines moved in unison, keeping their spacing mathematically exact, and as we turned, the triangle turned with us. It stayed locked on our nose, pinned to our heading as though we were the axis it was rotating around, as though the turn had accomplished nothing, as though we hadn't moved at all. I leveled out on a new heading, 290 degrees, west-northwest, away from Utqiagvik and back toward the interior. The triangle followed. I tried a shallow climb. It climbed. I dropped 500 feet. It dropped. Every change I made, it matched, instantly, perfectly, without lag or error. "It's matching us," the co-pilot said. "I know." The graduate researcher's voice came through the intercom, tight with controlled fear. "What is that thing?" "We don't know," I said. "Sit tight and keep your seatbelt on." I keyed the radio one more time, the act itself a kind of prayer, a reaching out toward the normal world in the hope that it was still there, still listening. "Any station, Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot, declaring emergency. We have unknown aerial phenomenon and total communications failure. Any station, respond." Static burst through the headset. Not clean static, broken, choppy, like someone keying a microphone in rapid, rhythmic pulses. A pattern in the noise. And then a voice came through. Male. Flat. Without accent, without inflection, without any of the qualities that make a human voice sound human. "Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot. Maintain heading. Do not deviate." I looked at the co-pilot. She shook her head slowly. That wasn't Fairbanks. That wasn't Barrow. That wasn't any controller either of us had ever heard. The cadence was wrong. Too measured, too even, as though the words were being reproduced rather than spoken, assembled from components rather than generated by a mind that understood their meaning. "Who is this?" I asked. "Identify yourself." No reply. Just the choppy static, that rhythmic keying, mechanical and patient. Then the voice repeated. Same words. Same flat tone. Same absolute lack of human warmth. "Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot. Maintain heading. Do not deviate." I ignored it and held my turn. The triangle pulsed once. A flash of white light so intense it left purple spots burned into my vision. The cockpit lit up as though someone had detonated a flare inside the aircraft. Every surface, every instrument, every scratch on the windscreen illuminated in brutal, shadowless white. The co-pilot shielded her eyes. I blinked hard and forced myself to keep scanning the instruments, relying on muscle memory and discipline when my vision couldn't be trusted. When my eyes cleared, the triangle was gone. The aurora had returned to normal. Green curtains rippling slowly across the northern horizon with their familiar, organic motion. The white lines were nowhere. The sky was just sky again. stars and magnetic light and the vast, indifferent darkness of the Arctic night. The radio crackled, and a familiar voice came through, warm, human, recognizably real. Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot, Fairbanks Radio, we've been trying to reach you. Do you copy? The co-pilot grabbed the mic. Fairbanks, Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot, we copy. We had total communications loss for approximately 8 minutes. Can you confirm? Negative, Twin Otter. We've had continuous contact. Last transmission from you was 3 minutes ago with a position report. I checked my watch. We'd been in that turn for more than 3 minutes. I was certain of it. The elapsed time was written in my body, in the tension of my hands on the yoke, in the sweat cooling on my back. But the clock on the instrument panel showed a time that matched what Fairbanks was saying. According to every official record, we had never lost contact. According to every official record, we had been talking to them the entire time. The co-pilot and I looked at each other. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound insane, and we both knew it. Fairbanks, we're experiencing equipment anomalies, I said carefully. Requesting priority handling into Barrow. Copy. Twin Otter. Cleared direct Barrow. Weather is reporting clear skies, wind calm. Altimeter 30.1. We flew the rest of the leg in silence. The graduate researcher asked a few questions, but I told him we'd discuss it on the ground. The co-pilot kept her hand on the yoke and her eyes on the sky. I watched the instruments. Everything functioned normally. Radios clean. GPS locked. Fuel flow steady. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the previous 10 minutes had been a shared hallucination that the aircraft itself refused to acknowledge. We landed at Utqiagvik just after 10 a.m. local time. The sun sat low on the horizon, a pale disk behind thin clouds, offering light without warmth, illumination without comfort. The tower cleared us to the ramp. I taxied slowly, feeling every bump in the frozen ground through the landing gear, through the seat, through my hands on the yoke. Every vibration felt significant now. Every sensation felt like data. When I shut down the engines, the silence felt wrong. Too complete. Too deliberate. As though the world had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. We unloaded the pallets in the cold. The graduate researcher thanked us politely and walked to the terminal building without looking back. He moved with the studied casualness of someone who has decided, consciously and firmly, that nothing unusual happened. I watched him go and wondered if he'd tell anyone. I suspected he wouldn't. The co-pilot and I stood by the nose of the aircraft. She pointed at the leading edge of the right wing. Look at this. The metal was covered in frost. Not the thin, delicate dusting you get from flying through cold air, the kind that brushes off with a glove. This was thick frost, crystallized and dense, the kind that forms when something extremely cold presses against something warmer for an extended period. But the wing hadn't been cold. The cabin heater had been running. The aircraft had been pressurized and warm inside throughout the flight. I walked around the nose. The left wing had the same frost pattern, dense, crystalline, wrong. And on the nose itself, directly in front of the windscreen, the paint had a discoloration. Not a scratch, not a chip, a faint scorch mark, the color of tarnished brass, as though the metal beneath the paint had been heated to a temperature that oxidized the surface. I pulled off my glove and touched it with my bare hand. It was warm. In February, on the Arctic coast, after 90 minutes on the ramp in sub-zero air, the nose of the aircraft was warm to the touch. That's not ice damage, the co-pilot said. No, I agreed. It isn't. We filed a maintenance report with the station manager and requested an inspection. A mechanic came out an hour later. A quiet man in oil-stained coveralls who looked at aircraft the way doctors look at patients, with clinical attention and no wasted words. He scraped a sample of the frost into a sterile bag and ran a thermal gun over the nose. The surface temperature read 47 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the ambient air by more than 30 degrees. How long you been on the ground? He asked. About 90 minutes, I said. He frowned and ran the gun again. Same result. He took photographs and said he'd send the frost sample to the laboratory. He didn't ask what had happened. I didn't volunteer. The co-pilot and I walked to the operations shack and sat with coffee. The heat from the mug felt good against my palms. She stared at the wall for a long time before speaking. "That voice on the radio," she said. "That wasn't ATC." "I know. So who was it?" "I don't know." We sat in silence. Outside, the wind picked up and pushed loose snow across the ramp in thin white lines. Parallel, orderly, like something was drawing on the ground with invisible fingers. The sky was empty. No aurora, no lights, no geometry. Just gray. We stayed in Utqiagvik that night at a small crew house the weather service maintains for transient pilots. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a space heater that rattled every time the wind pushed against the walls of the building. Bare walls. Thin curtains. The kind of place that exists purely to keep you alive between flights, offering shelter without comfort. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white line rotating in the sky. Smooth, mechanical, deliberate. When I did sleep, I dreamed of the cockpit filling with frost and the controls going dead in my hands. The yoke locked. The throttles frozen. The instruments dark. And through the windscreen, the triangle, growing larger, growing closer, growing until it filled the sky and there was nothing else. I woke at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark, listening to the wind scrape against the walls and the space heater rattle its metallic complaint. The ceiling was low and featureless. I stared at it and tried to convince myself that what had happened was explicable. Equipment failure. Aurora interference. Some atmospheric phenomenon that science hadn't fully catalogued. The words felt hollow even as I thought them. At 6 a.m., the co-pilot knocked on my door. She looked like she hadn't slept either, the same hollowed-out expression I'd seen in my own reflection when I'd passed the bathroom mirror. We made coffee and sat at the small table without talking much. The silence between us was different now. It had weight. It contained something neither of us was willing to name. Around 7:30 that morning, the contract pilot's phone rang. It was the operations chief in Fairbanks, the man who managed schedules, logistics, and the administrative infrastructure that kept the Weather Service's aviation program functioning. A practical man. A man who dealt in maintenance reports and fuel receipts and flight hours. "I got the maintenance report from Barrow," he said. "What happened up there?" The contract pilot gave him the short version. Communications failure. Equipment anomalies. Strange frost on the airframe. He didn't mention the lights. He didn't mention the voice. He told himself he'd add those details later if they became relevant, a rationalization that felt transparent even as he made it. "The mechanic sent photos," the operations chief said. "He said the nose looks cooked. It felt warm to the touch. Warm. In February. On a plane that's been sitting on the ramp. I know how it sounds." A pause. The contract pilot could hear typing on the other end, the operations chief entering information into systems, creating records, building the institutional paper trail that would follow this incident through whatever channels it was destined to travel. "The lab won't have results on the frost sample for a few days. In the meantime, I'm grounding the aircraft pending a full inspection. I've got another Twin Otter at Deadhorse. I'll have it flown down to pick you and your co-pilot up this afternoon." Understood. "And if something else happened up there, I need to know." The contract pilot looked at the co-pilot. She was sitting across the small table, watching him with an expression that communicated everything without saying a word. "Tell him. Don't tell him. We both know what we saw. We both know how it sounds. We saw lights," the contract pilot said. "In the aurora. They didn't behave normally." "What do you mean?" "They held position. They moved in formation. One of them looked like a straight line that tracked us for several minutes." The line went quiet. The operations chief's typing stopped. "Did you get any photos?" "No. It happened fast, and we were focused on flying the plane. Okay. Write it up. Everything you remember. Send it to me by tonight. I'll forward it to the NTSB and see what they say. They spent the rest of the morning writing the report. The contract pilot and the co-pilot sat side by side with their laptops at the crewhouse table and went through the timeline step by step. Times, headings, altitudes, equipment behavior, what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. They kept it factual, no speculation, no dramatization, no attempt to interpret or explain. Just the sequence of events as they had experienced them, rendered in the plain, precise language of people who understood that their credibility was the only currency they had. When they finished, the contract pilot read the report back aloud. It sounded insane even to him. A white line that didn't move like aurora. A triangle of lights that matched their maneuvers. Radios that died and came back. A voice that addressed them by tail number and told them not to deviate. A flash of light that erased everything. And a timeline that didn't agree with the official record. You think they'll believe us? The co-pilot asked. I don't know, the contract pilot said. But it's what happened. The replacement plane arrived just after 2 p.m., a different Twin Otter, flown by a younger pilot the contract pilot had met once before at a maintenance briefing. The younger man didn't ask questions. He had the incurious professionalism of someone who'd been told to pick up 2 pilots and bring them home, and that was exactly what he intended to do. They loaded their gear and took off into a clear sky. The flight back to Fairbanks was smooth and unremarkable. No aurora. No lights. No geometry assembling itself in the darkness ahead. Just cold air and empty space and the steady drone of engines that did exactly what they were supposed to do. The co-pilot stared out the window the entire flight. The contract pilot watched the instruments and tried not to think about the white line. He failed. 3 days later, the lab results came back. The frost sample from the wing contained water ice. No unusual isotopes, no contaminants, no exotic chemistry, just frozen water vapor. But the crystalline structure was abnormal. The report noted that the formation pattern resembled what you'd find in a high-altitude cirrus cloud. Ice crystals formed at extreme altitude and extreme cold, not on the surface of a wing at ground level. Something had deposited ice on the aircraft that had formed under conditions that didn't exist at the altitude they'd been flying. The metallurgy on the nose scorch was more troubling. Surface oxidation consistent with rapid heating followed by rapid cooling. The report estimated the metal had reached over 400 degrees Fahrenheit at some point during the flight, hot enough to discolor the paint, hot enough to oxidize the aluminum beneath, but somehow not hot enough to damage the windscreen inches away or melt the ice that had formed on the adjacent wing surfaces. Localized heat. Intense, brief, and impossibly precise. The operations chief called the contract pilot into his office. He had the lab report on his desk along with their written account and a printout of something else, a document the contract pilot didn't immediately recognize. Sit down, the operations chief said. The contract pilot sat. The office was small, cluttered with charts and manuals and the accumulated administrative debris of a man who'd spent 20 years keeping aircraft flying in the worst weather on Earth. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Everything about the room was ordinary. Everything about the conversation was not. The operations chief pushed the printout across the desk. It was a communications log from Fairbanks Air Route Traffic Control Center. Timestamps and transmissions, formatted in the standard layout used for archival purposes. The contract pilot scanned it and found the window where they'd lost contact. What he read made his stomach clench. They're saying we had continuous contact, he said. Correct, the operations chief replied. But look at the transcript. He read it more carefully. The log showed transmissions from their aircraft, their tail number, their call sign, every 3 minutes during the window in question. Position reports. Routine updates. Standard phraseology. The kind of unremarkable radio traffic that fills the airwaves on every flight across every route in the system. But the contract pilot knew, with absolute certainty, that they hadn't made those calls. During that window, both radios had been dead. He'd been focused on the lights, on the equipment failures, on the triangle of white lines that matched every move he made. The co-pilot had been cycling the radio and getting nothing. Neither of them had transmitted a single word. "That's not possible," the contract pilot said. "We had total comms loss. Both radios were dead." "I believe you," the operations chief said, and his voice carried the particular weight of a man who means it even though he knows it creates a problem he can't solve. "But according to this, you were talking to them the whole time. Then someone else was transmitting on our tail number." The operations chief leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man confronting a situation that exceeds the boundaries of his job description. "The NTSB reviewed everything," he said. "They don't have an explanation. The equipment checks out. The radios tested fine. The GPS logs show a clean track with no deviations. But your account and the physical evidence say something else happened." "What do they think?" "Officially, unexplained equipment malfunction and possible environmental interference from the Aurora. Unofficially, they're filing it under unknown." That's it. That's it. Unless you, or the co-pilot, have something else to add." The contract pilot thought about the voice on the radio. "Maintain heading. Do not deviate." He thought about the triangle of lines matching their every maneuver with mathematical precision. He thought about the graduate researcher in the back who'd seen the same thing they did, who'd pressed his face to the glass and asked what it was. "Did anyone interview the passenger?" he asked. "He declined," the operations chief said. "Said he didn't see anything unusual and didn't want to be involved." That surprised the contract pilot. The young man had been glued to the window. He'd asked questions through the intercom. He'd been a witness. But the contract pilot didn't push it. People make their own decisions about what they're willing to acknowledge, and the graduate researcher had made his. "All right," the contract pilot said. "What's the status on the plane?" "Cleared to fly. Repairs were minor, some surface work on the nose, new radio antennas as a precaution. It's back in service." The contract pilot nodded. The operations chief looked at him for a long, measuring moment. The kind of look that contains a question the person asking isn't sure they want answered. "You want to keep flying the Barrow route?" he asked. "I don't know yet." "Fair enough. Take a few days. Let me know." The contract pilot left the office and found the co-pilot in the break room. She'd already heard the results, the lab findings, the impossible radio log, the NTSB's non-conclusion. They sat with bad coffee and stared at the snow melting in streaks down the window. Outside, Fairbanks was doing what Fairbanks does in late winter, existing in that transitional space between the deep cold and the approaching thaw, everything gray and white and waiting. "You believe the radio log?" the co-pilot asked. "No. Me neither." They didn't fly together for the next 2 weeks. The co-pilot took a cargo run to Bethel. The contract pilot flew a surveyor down to the Kenai Peninsula. Normal work in normal skies. But every time he climbed above 5,000 feet at night and saw the aurora start to shimmer on the northern horizon, his chest tightened. A physical response he couldn't override, his body remembering something his mind was trying to file away. He kept his hand on the yoke and his eyes on the instruments, and he avoided looking north. During those 2 weeks, the contract pilot started researching. He recognized how it sounded, a pilot sitting alone in his apartment at 2 a.m., scrolling through reports of unidentified phenomena, reading accounts from people he'd normally dismiss. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He wasn't someone who saw patterns in noise. He was a man who'd experienced something he couldn't explain, and he needed to know if anyone else had seen what he'd seen. He found reports. Lots of them. Pilots over Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia. Lights that tracked aircraft at high latitude, radio interference that corresponded with visual phenomena, equipment failures that resolved the moment the lights disappeared. Most were dismissed as aurora effects or equipment malfunctions. None had physical evidence like the frost and the scorch marks. None had the radio log showing transmissions that were never made. Then he found something else. A declassified report from the 1980s. A military cargo aircraft flying from Elmendorf Air Force Base to a radar station on the North Slope had reported a large unidentified aerial object that paced them for 18 minutes. The aircraft experienced radio failure, compass deviations, and engine fluctuations. When they landed, the fuselage had scorch marks on the nose and wings. The report ended with a note, unable to determine origin or nature of object. Crew advised to avoid further discussion. The contract pilot printed the report and brought it to the co-pilot. She read it in silence, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "This is from 40 years ago," she said. "I know. So this has been happening for a long time. Maybe." She set the paper down and looked at him. "What do you think it is?" "I don't know. But I think it's been watching the route. And I think we got too close." In early March, the contract pilot was assigned to another Barrow run. Different plane, different cargo, but the same route, the same 700 miles of tundra and mountain and frozen coast between Fairbanks and Utqiagvik. He requested the co-pilot as his partner. She agreed without hesitation, and neither of them discussed why. They just knew. Whatever was waiting on that route, they would face it together or not at all. The flight was scheduled for late afternoon, with an arrival just after dark. The weather was good, clear skies, light winds, the kind of conditions that should have made the flight unremarkable. They pre-flight the aircraft together and went through every system twice. Radios, GPS backup power, navigation lights, environmental controls. Everything checked and double-checked with the thoroughness of people who no longer trusted the sky to behave predictably. They took off from Fairbanks at 4:17 p.m. The sun was already low, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and violet, the kind of sunset that looks like the atmosphere is on fire. They climbed to 9,000 feet and settled into the cruise. No passengers this time. Just the two of them and 3 pallets of equipment secured in the cargo area behind the cockpit. An hour into the flight, the aurora appeared. A green curtain stretched across the northern horizon, normal movement, normal colors, the familiar display of charged particles following magnetic field lines. The contract pilot watched it for a few minutes and felt himself relax slightly. Maybe the first encounter had been an anomaly. Maybe whatever they'd seen wouldn't return. Maybe the route was safe. Then the co-pilot spoke. Quiet, controlled, with the precision of someone reporting an instrument reading. 10 o'clock low. He looked. A single point of white light sat just above the horizon to their left. Steady. Not blinking. Not moving. Just there, a fixed point of brightness against the dark landscape below. Could be a tower, the contract pilot said, reaching for the explanation that required the least adjustment to his understanding of the world. "We're 140 miles from the coast," the co-pilot said. "There's no tower out here." He checked the sectional chart. She was right. Nothing but tundra and frozen lakes beneath them. No structures, no roads, no settlements, no reason for a light to exist in that location. The light didn't move. They flew toward it because it sat near their route, because their heading carried them in its direction, because there was no avoiding it without deviating from the path they were supposed to follow. As they closed the distance, the light grew brighter but didn't resolve into anything identifiable. No shape, no beam, no structure. Just a point of white against the dark land, like a star that had detached from the sky and settled on the surface of the earth. Then it blinked out. 1 second present. The next second gone, extinguished without transition, as though it had never existed. The contract pilot scanned the horizon. Nothing. "Did you see where it went?" "No," the co-pilot said. "It just stopped." They continued on course. The aurora intensified, bands of green and purple rippling overhead with increasing energy. Beautiful and, for the moment, normal. The contract pilot started to believe they'd imagined the light. Started to fold it into the category of things that are easily explained if you don't think about them too carefully. Then the radio crackled. Twin Otter November 72 Tango Foxtrot. Turn right heading 045. The voice was male. Flat. Emotionless. The same voice from the first flight. The same cadence, the same mechanical precision, the same absolute absence of human quality. As though the words were being read from a script by something that understood language but not meaning. The contract pilot didn't touch the controls. The co-pilot keyed her mic. Say again. Who is this? Turn right heading 045. Maintain altitude. Negative, the contract pilot said. We are on course for Barrow. Identify yourself. No response. Just silence. The heavy, pressurized silence of a frequency that should be carrying traffic but had been emptied of everything except that single, inhuman voice. Then the temperature in the cockpit dropped. Fast. The same impossible chill. The same violation of the heated, sealed environment that should have been impervious to external conditions. The contract pilot could see his breath. Frost crept across the edges of the windscreen in crystalline patterns that spread with organic urgency, like frost was alive and hungry, and the glass was what it fed on. The GPS flickered. The position jumped wildly. The same erratic cycling of impossible coordinates, the same digital seizure that transformed reliable instruments into liars. Same as before. Exactly the same. Here we go, the co-pilot said quietly. The white point reappeared. This time directly ahead of them, precisely on their heading. And it wasn't a point anymore. It was a line. Horizontal. Thin. Bright. The exact same line from the first flight. The same impossible geometry. The same chalk mark precision. The same motionless suspension in the sky ahead. As if it had been waiting for them to return. As if it had never left. We need to turn, the co-pilot said. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has decided that composure is a tool and fear is a luxury they cannot afford. Agreed. The contract pilot banked right. A controlled 30-degree turn to the southeast, away from the line, away from Utqiagvik, away from whatever had arranged itself in the sky ahead of their aircraft for the second time in 3 weeks. The line followed. It rotated to match their new heading and stayed locked on their nose, pinned to the center of their windscreen as though it were painted on the glass rather than suspended in the atmosphere. There was no lag, no delay, no transitional movement. They turned, it turned. Simultaneously, as though they were connected to it by something rigid and invisible. The engine stuttered. Both at once, the same synchronized falter, the same hiccup in the twin heartbeat that kept them airborne. The manifold pressure dropped. The contract pilot pushed the throttles forward and the engines caught, but the rhythm was rough. He could feel the vibration through the yoke, a tremor that hadn't been there before, something wrong in the machinery, or something wrong in the air the machinery was trying to move through. The line split into 3. Triangle formation. Points up. They began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, gathering angular momentum with the deliberate acceleration of something building toward a purpose. The aurora around them dimmed and the sky went dark, emptied of every light source except those 3 lines of white that defined the boundaries of something they couldn't see. And then they dropped. Not a stall. Not turbulence. Not any of the aerodynamic phenomena that pilots train for and understand. A drop. The plane fell 800 feet in less than 3 seconds. The contract pilot's stomach lurched against his spine. Loose items in the cargo area hit the ceiling. The sound of equipment cases and straps and unsecured objects colliding with the overhead in a cacophony of impact that meant the aircraft had essentially ceased to fly and was falling through the sky like a stone. The co-pilot grabbed the yoke with both hands. The contract pilot pulled back hard, fighting for nose-up authority, but the controls felt mushy, soft, unresponsive, as though the connection between the yoke and the control surfaces had been replaced with something elastic. The altitude unwound on the gauge. 8,200. 7,900. 7,600. The co-pilot shouted his call sign. A warning. A plea. The engines roared back to life at full power, without the contract pilot touching the throttles. They slammed to maximum output on their own, as though an invisible hand had shoved the power levers forward with authority that superseded the pilot's. The plane leveled hard. Too hard. The G-force pushed both pilots into their seats with a weight that compressed their spines and pressed the air from their lungs. The airspeed jumped. The vertical speed indicator swung from negative 2,000 feet per minute to positive 1,500 in a heartbeat, a reversal so violent it should have overstressed the airframe. They climbed. Fast. Faster than the Twin Otter was capable of climbing under its own performance parameters. The engine screamed, the turboprops producing power that exceeded their rated output, the propellers biting air at pitch angles that should have triggered overspeed warnings. The airspeed redlined. The contract pilot pulled the throttles to idle. The engines didn't respond. The throttle levers moved under his hands, pulled themselves back to the full forward position as though they were spring-loaded, as though the machine had decided where the throttles belonged and the pilot's input was no longer relevant. 9,000 feet. 10,000. 11,000. The air grew thinner. The temperature inside the cockpit continued to fall. The contract pilot could see ice forming on the instrument panel, delicate crystals spreading across the glass faces of gauges that should have been warm, that should have been protected by the cockpit's environmental systems. 12,000. 13,000. The rate of climb didn't slow. The engines maintained full power. The controls remained locked, the yoke immovable, the throttles fixed, every input the contract pilot attempted absorbed by the aircraft without effect, as though the plane were no longer responding to the person sitting in the left seat, but to something else entirely. "We're going to stall," the co-pilot yelled. And she was right, the airspeed was dropping even though they were climbing. The wings couldn't sustain lift at this angle and this altitude. The air was too thin. The angle was too steep. The inevitable conclusion was an aerodynamic stall at 14,000 feet in the dark over the north slope with no radio contact and no control authority. The contract pilot pushed the yoke forward with everything he had. It wouldn't move. Locked solid. Not jammed, not restricted, locked, as though the control column had been welded in place by something that wanted the aircraft exactly where it was, doing exactly what it was doing. At 14,200 feet, the plane stopped climbing. It just stopped. The engines went to idle on their own, the throttle levers easing back smoothly, mechanically, without human input. The airspeed stabilized at 95 knots. The vertical speed indicator settled to 0. They hung there in the sky, level, steady, motionless relative to the ground below, like the aircraft had been placed on a shelf by something that possessed the authority to suspend the laws of aerodynamics. The triangle of lights moved closer. Not fast, deliberate. They approached from ahead and below, rising toward the aircraft's altitude with the patient precision of something that was in no hurry because it knew its quarry wasn't going anywhere. As they drew nearer, the contract pilot could see that the lines weren't lines anymore. They were edges, borders, the visible perimeters of something larger, something he couldn't see fully but could sense in the way the stars behind them disappeared. The thing was enormous. The 3 white lines were just the corners of it, the luminous boundaries of a shape that filled the contract pilot's entire field of vision. Dark, massive, silent. It rose until it was level with them, perhaps 500 feet off their nose, and then it stopped. They sat there, the Twin Otter hanging motionless in the thin Arctic air, the vast dark shape suspended before them. The aurora was gone. The sky was black except for the stars and the 3 white lines that marked the edges of something the contract pilot didn't understand and knew, with absolute certainty, he was not meant to understand. "What do we do?" the co-pilot whispered. "I don't know," the contract pilot said. The radio crackled. The same voice, flat, inhuman, mechanical. "Do not deviate." And then, without warning, they dropped again. Faster this time. The altimeter spun backward, 13,000, 12,000, 10,000. The engines stayed at idle. The controls stayed locked. They fell like a stone dropped from a shelf, the dark shape receding above them as they plummeted, the white lines growing smaller, the stars returning, the sky widening as the distance between them and whatever had held them increased with every second of freefall. At 8,000 feet, the controls released. The contract pilot grabbed the yoke and pulled back with everything he had. This time, the aircraft responded. The nose came up. The engines spooled back to power, obedient now, responsive now, as though the machine had been returned to its rightful owner after a period of unauthorized use. He leveled out at 7,500 feet and checked the systems with the desperate thoroughness of a man who needs to believe the world still functions according to rules. Everything was back to normal. Radios working. GPS locked. Temperature rising in the cockpit. The frost on the windscreen began to melt, running in thin streaks down the glass like tears. He looked for the shape. It was gone. The triangle was gone. The sky was empty, just the aurora returning to its slow, organic ripple, and the distant glow of Utqiagvik on the horizon, a faint smear of human light against the vast Arctic dark. The co-pilot's hands shook. The contract pilots did, too. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything that could be communicated had already been said by the silence, by the tremor in their hands, by the sweat cooling on their backs. They just flew. The contract pilot turned them back on course and engaged the autopilot. His legs felt weak, the muscles drained of everything they'd held during those minutes of locked controls and helpless freefall. They landed at Utqiagvik 20 minutes later. The tower cleared them without comment. On the ramp, they shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit listening to the ticking of cooling metal and the wind pushing against the fuselage. After a long moment, the co-pilot unbuckled and climbed out. The contract pilot followed. The cold hit them immediately, the brutal, indifferent cold of the Arctic coast in March, the kind that freezes exposed skin in minutes and turns breath into ice crystals before it clears your lips. The nose of the plane had the same scorch mark. The wings had the same dense, crystalline frost. And this time, there was something else. On the belly of the fuselage, near the cargo door, 3 parallel lines had been burned into the paint. Each line was perfectly straight. Each one approximately 3 feet long. Evenly spaced, the distance between them identical, the geometry precise, as though measured with instruments rather than applied by any organic process. They stood in the cold and stared at them. 3 lines. Parallel. Burned through the paint and into the primer beneath. The contract pilot didn't have words. The co-pilot walked back to the nose and ran her hand over the scorch mark, the familiar warm patch of oxidized metal that had become the signature of these encounters. "We can't keep flying this route," she said. "I know." They filed another report. This time, the contract pilot included everything: the voice, the loss of control, the forced climb and the freefall, the massive dark shape they couldn't fully see, the 3 lines burned into the belly of the aircraft. He didn't care how it sounded. He didn't care who believed it. It had happened. They had physical evidence. And the next crew that flew this route deserved to know what was waiting for them in the sky between Fairbanks and Utqiagvik. The operations chief read the report twice. Then he called both pilots into his office. He looked older than the contract pilot remembered, more gray at the temples, deeper lines around the eyes. The face of a man carrying weight that didn't belong in his job description. "I spoke with the FAA," he said. "They want to interview both of you. Separately. They also want to inspect the plane again." "When?" "Tomorrow. An investigator is flying up from Anchorage tonight." The contract pilot and the co-pilot exchanged a look, the look of 2 people who have stopped being surprised by escalation. "Are we in trouble?" the co-pilot asked. "No," the operations chief said. "But they need to understand what happened. 2 incidents on the same route with the same crew. That raises questions." The investigator was a woman in her 50s with a calm, unhurried demeanor of someone who had spent years listening to pilots describe things that defied conventional explanation. She had the patience of a confessor and the analytical precision of an engineer. The kind of person who doesn't react to extraordinary claims because reaction would interfere with assessment. She interviewed the contract pilot first, in a small conference room at the Weather Service building. Recorder on the table. Notepad in front of her. No judgment in her expression, no skepticism, just attention. "Walk me through the second flight," she said. "Start from takeoff." He did. He gave her every detail. Times, altitudes, the lights, the voice, the loss of control, the forced climb and the drop, the shape, the marks on the plane. She took notes in small, precise handwriting and didn't interrupt. When he finished, she sat back. "You said the controls locked," she said. "Both yoke and throttles." "Correct. And they released at 8,000 feet. "Yes. Did you try to override them while they were locked?" "I pulled on the yoke with everything I had. It didn't move." She made a note. "And the voice on the radio. You're certain it wasn't ATC?" "I'm certain." "Could it have been another aircraft?" "It addressed us by tail number. Twice." She nodded. The Fairbanks ATC log shows no record of those transmissions. No other aircraft reported being on frequency at that time. "I know how that sounds," the contract pilot said. "It sounds like you're telling the truth," she said. "The physical evidence backs your account. The problem is we don't have an explanation that fits the evidence." "What do you mean?" She flipped through her notes. The scorch marks on the nose tested positive for extreme heat exposure. The frost samples contained crystalline structures that don't match surface conditions. The 3 lines on the fuselage belly were made by something that burned through the paint and into the primer in a perfectly straight path. No tool marks. No chemical residue. Just heat, precisely applied, perfectly controlled. "So you believe us?" "I believe something happened," she said. "I don't know what." The co-pilot's interview lasted longer. When she emerged from the conference room, her face was pale, the pallor of someone who has been asked to revisit an experience they are still trying to process. They walked to the truck and sat in the cab with the heater running. "What did she ask you?" the contract pilot said. "Same questions," the co-pilot replied. "She showed me the photos of the marks. She asked if I thought it was a weapon." "A weapon?" She didn't say it directly, but she asked if I felt targeted. If I thought the plane was attacked. The contract pilot considered that. The forced climb. The locked controls. The voice telling them to maintain heading. The freefall that stopped exactly when the controls were returned. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it was a warning." "Warning about what?" "I don't know. But it let us go. Twice." That was true. Whatever it was, whatever vast, dark, silent thing had held their aircraft at 14,000 feet, and then dropped it like a toy it was finished examining, it hadn't brought them down. It had controlled them, held them, and then released them. Both times. The contract pilot didn't know if that made him feel better or worse. The FAA grounded both of them for 2 weeks pending a full review. They also impounded the aircraft and had it transported to a hangar in Anchorage for detailed inspection. The co-pilot went back to her apartment in Fairbanks. The contract pilot stayed at his place south of town and tried not to think about it. He failed. Every night he replayed the flights in his mind, the white line rotating in the aurora, the triangle that matched their turns, the dark shape that rose before them and filled the sky with something he couldn't see but felt in every nerve. The feeling of the controls locking under his hands. The sensation of being held, suspended, by something that didn't need his cooperation or his consent. The FAA completed their investigation in late March. They found no mechanical failure. No pilot error. No explanation for the physical damage or the reported events. The final report listed the cause as unknown aerial phenomenon with associated equipment anomalies. They cleared both pilots to return to flight status but recommended they avoid the Barrow route for the foreseeable future. The operations chief called them in. "I'm reassigning you both," he said. "You're moving to the southeastern routes, Juneau and Sitka. Your co-pilot, I've got a contract slot open for coastal survey work. She'll be based in Cordova." "What about the Barrow run?" the contract pilot asked. "I'm bringing in a pilot from outside." Someone who doesn't know what happened. Less baggage. The contract pilot felt something tighten in his chest, not relief, not disappointment. Something closer to unease. You're not going to tell them? I'll brief them on the equipment issues. But no, I'm not going to tell them about the lights. They'll either see it themselves, or they won't. The co-pilot and the contract pilot left the office and walked to the parking lot. The spring sun was out, bright, insistent, melting the snow in slow rivulets that ran across the asphalt. It felt like a different world from the cold darkness of February. A world where the sky was just sky and light behaved the way it was supposed to. You think that pilot will be okay? The co-pilot asked. I don't know. They stood by her truck. She looked north, toward the Brooks Range and the empty tundra beyond, toward the route they'd flown together and the sky that had shown them something that couldn't be unforgotten. I keep thinking about what that voice said, she said. Do not deviate. Like we were supposed to stay on a specific path. Or stay out of a specific area. Yeah. They said goodbye and she drove off. The contract pilot watched her taillights disappear down the road and felt the particular loneliness of someone who shares a secret that the rest of the world isn't equipped to hear. He hasn't flown with her since. They still exchange messages occasionally. Brief, careful communications that circle the subject without touching it directly. She's doing well in Cordova. The coastal work is calm and predictable. The sky over the Gulf of Alaska doesn't play games. The contract pilot moved to the southeastern routes and flies in weather that's wet but manageable. He doesn't miss the Arctic. But he thinks about it. He thinks about the white line that wouldn't move like anything natural. He thinks about the triangle that matched their every turn with mathematical precision. He thinks about the dark shape that rose before them and filled the sky with something he couldn't see but felt in every cell of his body. He thinks about the voice that told them where to go, and then let them leave. The new pilot flew the Barrow route for 2 months before he quit. The contract pilot heard about it from another pilot in the break room, mentioned casually, the way you'd mention a scheduling change. No details. Just that the man didn't want to fly that route anymore. The contract pilot didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He wrote down his account because he believes people should know. Not for attention. Not for theories. Just as a record, a document that proves 2 pilots with 40 combined years of Arctic flying experience saw something in the sky that didn't belong there, and the sky left marks on their aircraft to prove it wasn't a dream. If you're a pilot and you fly the northern routes, watch the aurora. If you see a white line that holds position inside the frozen bands, turn around. If you hear a voice on the radio that doesn't identify itself and tells you where to go, don't listen. If your controls lock and your plane starts to climb or drop on its own, fight for it with everything you have and pray that whatever's holding you decides to let go. And if you land and find marks on your plane that shouldn't be there, document them. Take photographs. File a report. Don't let it disappear into the system. Don't let institutional convenience erase what happened to you. The contract pilot doesn't know what they saw. He doesn't know if it was a machine or something else. He doesn't know if it was interested in them specifically or just in that stretch of sky. What he knows is that it was real. It left marks. It took control of their aircraft. It spoke to them. And it let them go. He still flies. He still loves the work. But he doesn't fly north anymore. He doesn't watch the aurora the same way. And when he sees a light in the sky that doesn't behave like it should, he turns around. No hesitation. No second guessing. He learned that lesson twice. He doesn't need a third. The marks on that aircraft are still there. They repainted the nose, but the metal underneath remembers. The 3 lines on the belly were too deep to buff out, so they painted over them. If you know where to look, you can still see the outline beneath the new coat. 3 perfectly parallel lines, evenly spaced, burned into aluminum by something that shouldn't exist. The contract pilot saw it on the ramp last week. He walked up to it and stood by the belly. He ran his hand over the paint where the lines were. The surface was smooth, but he could feel it. A warmth that didn't match the ambient temperature. Like the metal was holding on to something it couldn't release. Like it remembered what had touched it, and the memory generated heat. He doesn't know what's up there. He doesn't know what it wants. He just knows it's there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when you fly too close, it reaches out. They got touched. They got marked. And they got let go. That's all he has. That's all he can tell you. The rest is just frozen sky and empty air and a voice that told them where to go and wouldn't say why. If you fly that route, be careful. Be ready. And if you see a white line in the aurora that doesn't move like it should, remember this. You're not alone up there. And whatever's with you, it's been there longer than we have. I'm a meteorologist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. For the past 6 years, I've rotated through remote research stations across Alaska, collecting data on Arctic weather patterns and atmospheric conditions. Most of that work is routine: temperature readings, wind speed, barometric pressure. You log the numbers, upload them to the regional office, and watch the sky. It's not glamorous work. It's not exciting. But it's necessary, and there is a particular satisfaction in performing a task that the world depends on without knowing it exists. The station where this happens sits 47 miles northwest of Deadhorse, on a flat stretch of tundra that extends to the horizon in every direction. No trees. No hills. No contour of any kind to interrupt the vast, featureless plain of frozen earth and sky. The landscape is so flat that distance loses meaning. You can see something on the horizon and not know if it's a mile away or 10. The mind has nothing to calibrate against, no reference point for scale. You are simply there, on the surface of something enormous, under a sky that feels too close and too far away at the same time. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Minnesota, so cold weather doesn't bother me the way it bothers people from warmer climates. I've shoveled driveways at 20 below. I've waited for buses in wind chills that made my eyelashes freeze together. But Arctic cold is different. It's not just the temperature, it's the quality of the air itself. Thin, brittle, like the atmosphere could shatter if you struck it with sufficient force. Sound travels wrong up there. A voice that should carry 100 yards dies after 20. A crack of ice that should be barely audible sounds like a gunshot echoing off nothing. The physics of the place operate under rules that feel subtly altered, as though the far north exists in a slightly different version of reality than the one you grew up in. The station is called Point Lonely. The name isn't poetic. It's literal. One prefab building, 12 feet by 20, insulated walls, a corrugated metal roof, and a diesel generator that runs 20 hours a day and fills the silence with a constant, industrial hum that becomes so familiar you stop hearing it until it stops, and then the silence that replaces it is worse. Inside, you have a workspace with computers and monitoring equipment. A small kitchenette, microwave, coffee maker, a propane stove that works when it wants to. A sleeping area with 2 bunks separated by a privacy curtain that provides the illusion of personal space without the reality of it. Outside, you have an antenna mast, a weather station tower, and a fuel shed. That's the entirety of Point Lonely. That's the sum of human civilization at that particular coordinate on the surface of the earth. The nearest other human being is in Deadhorse, and they're only there if the oil crews are working. I was stationed at Point Lonely from January 10th to February 14th with a technician I'll call the station technician. He was younger than me by 7 years, quiet, competent, better with equipment than with conversation. If something stopped working, the station technician could usually fix it. He was from Oregon. This was his second winter rotation in the Arctic. We got along fine. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The work was straightforward, and the days had a rhythm that made silence comfortable rather than oppressive. Morning readings, maintenance checks, data uploads, meals, sleep, repeat. The rhythm of institutional routine performed at the edge of habitable space. The radio was our primary link to the outside world. It sat on a metal shelf above the workbench, a standard VHF transceiver hardwired to the antenna mast outside. We used it for daily check-ins with Deadhorse and for weather updates. The protocol was simple and inviolable. Every morning at 0800 and every evening at 1800, we called in and confirmed we were operational. If we missed a check-in, they'd send someone to investigate. The consequences of a missed check-in in the Arctic are too severe to tolerate ambiguity. The radio stayed on all the time. Volume low, tuned to the emergency frequency, 121.5 MHz. Background noise. Static. Occasionally, a voice from a plane passing overhead or a crew working the oil fields to the east. Familiar sounds. The audible proof that other human beings existed somewhere beyond the white horizon. Nothing unusual. Nothing that demanded attention. Until January 27th. That night, I went to bed just after 2200. The station technician was still awake, working on a data set at his laptop. The wind outside was steady, about 20 knots, and the building creaked the way it always did when the pressure shifted against the walls, the prefab structure flexing with the wind like a living thing, adjusting its posture. The temperature had dropped to negative 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal for late January. Expected. Unremarkable. I pulled the sleeping bag up to my chin and listened to the station technician typing in the main room, the soft, irregular rhythm of fingers on keys, a sound that was somehow both mechanical and human. After a while, the typing stopped. I heard him move to his bunk on the other side of the curtain. The generator hummed. The wind hissed against the walls. I fell asleep. At 0113, the radio woke me. Not a voice. Not static. Just the click of the unit powering on. I know that sound, the sharp, metallic snap of the power switch engaging, distinct from every other sound the station makes. We turn the radio off sometimes during equipment maintenance or when the static becomes too loud for concentration. The switch is mechanical, a physical toggle that requires deliberate force to move from one position to the other. It doesn't drift. It doesn't toggle on its own. It requires a finger, a thumb, an intentional act of human will. I heard it clearly. The click. Sharp. Definitive. As though someone had walked to the shelf and pushed the switch. I sat up in my bunk and listened. The radio hissed with carrier wave static, the familiar background noise of an open frequency. Then a voice came through. Male. Steady. No accent. No emotion. No inflection of any kind. Just words, delivered with the flat precision of something reading from a script that it understood syntactically but not semantically. We are not cold. That was it. 4 words. Then silence, not static, not carrier wave hum, just dead air. An absence so complete it felt deliberate, as though the frequency had been cleared specifically for those 4 words and then sealed shut behind them. I waited. My heart rate climbed, not from terror but from the physical recognition that something wrong had just occurred, that the boundary between the ordinary and the impossible had been crossed by a mechanical click and 4 spoken words. I heard the station technician shift in his bunk. The curtain moved and his face appeared in the dim light from the computer monitor in the main room. Pale, alert, the expression of someone who has been jolted from the edge of sleep by something they're not sure they actually heard. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah." We got up and moved into the main room. The radio sat on the shelf, power light on, volume knob at its usual low position, the green LED glowing steadily in the darkness of the station. The meteorologist checked the frequency display. It showed 121.5 MHz, the emergency channel. Exactly where it should be. Exactly where they'd left it. The station technician reached for the mic. "Who is this?" "Identify yourself." No response. He tried again. Still nothing. The frequency was open but empty, a line to nowhere. The meteorologist leaned over and checked the settings. Everything looked normal. The squelch was properly adjusted. The antenna connection was solid, the coaxial cable running through the wall to the mast outside, intact and undamaged. There was no reason for the radio to turn itself on. The power switch was mechanical. It required physical force. "Did you touch it earlier?" she asked. "No," the station technician said. "I haven't touched the radio since the 1800 check-in." She looked at the switch. It was in the on position. She knew she hadn't turned it on. The station technician said he hadn't either. She tried to construct an explanation. A power surge from the generator, but a power surge wouldn't flip a mechanical switch, it would blow a fuse. A short in the wiring, but that would cause the radio to malfunction, not power on cleanly with a proper carrier wave and clear audio. "What did the voice say?" the station technician asked. "We are not cold," the meteorologist said. He frowned. "That's it. That's it." They stood in the cold room, staring at the radio. The static had returned, low, steady, normal. Background noise. No voice. No transmission. The frequency was what it had always been. An open channel connecting them to a world that was currently saying nothing. "Maybe someone was testing a transmitter," the station technician offered. "Keyed the wrong frequency." "At 0113, the meteorologist said. "In the middle of nowhere?" He didn't have a response. And she didn't have an explanation. But she'd heard the click, the deliberate mechanical snap of a power switch moving from off to on. And she knew the power light had been dark when she went to bed. She'd glanced at it out of habit, the way you check a lock before you sleep, the quick visual confirmation that everything is as it should be. The light had been off. The switch had been in the off position. They decided to log it. The station technician opened the station journal, a hardbound ledger that served as the official record of everything that occurred at Point Lonely, and wrote down the time, the frequency, and the message. The meteorologist added a note about the radio turning on by itself. It felt strange to write it down. Strange and necessary. Like committing to a reality you didn't choose. "Should we call Deadhorse?" the station technician asked. She considered it. What would they say? The radio turned itself on at 0113 and someone said they weren't cold. The sentence was absurd. It was the kind of report that makes operations managers question the psychological stability of their field personnel. "Let's wait," she said. "If it happens again, we'll report it." They went back to bed. The meteorologist didn't sleep much. She lay in her bunk and listened for the click, the sharp, metallic sound that would mean the radio had decided, on its own, to receive visitors again. It didn't come. The wind picked up and the building shook, the walls flexing, the roof creaking, the generator maintaining its tireless hum. She heard the station technician shifting in his bunk. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. At 0800, they completed the morning check-in. Deadhorse responded normally. They gave the weather readings and confirmed they were operational. The meteorologist didn't mention the radio incident. It felt too strange to bring up over the air, too fragile, too easily dismissed. The day passed without event. They took readings. The station technician ran diagnostics on the monitoring equipment. The meteorologist uploaded data and reviewed the week's logs. The sky was overcast and gray, that particular shade of Arctic gray that eliminates the horizon, that merges earth and sky into a single, undifferentiated plane of colorlessness. At 1400, the meteorologist went outside to check the weather station tower. The cold hit her the instant she opened the door, a wall of frozen air that pressed against her exposed skin with physical force. -41 with wind chill pushing it lower. She wore a heavy parka, insulated pants, boots rated to -60, and a balaclava that covered everything except her eyes. Even with all that, the air burned in her lungs, each breath a small act of violence against the tissue of her airways. The weather tower stood about 30 yards from the building, a simple structure, 10 feet tall, white-painted metal with sensors mounted at the top. She walked to it slowly, checking her footing on the ice. The tundra up here is deceptive. It looks flat and solid, but underneath the snow there are rocks and frozen tussocks that can twist an ankle without warning. When she reached the tower, she stopped. The snow around the base was smooth and undisturbed. No animal tracks. No wind drift patterns. Normal. But from where she stood, she could see the antenna mast, the 20-foot aluminum pole with the radio antenna at the top and guy wires anchored in concrete footings, standing 50 feet from the building in the opposite direction. The top section was dark. Not white with frost. Not silver with ice. Dark. The color of metal that has been subjected to something that changed its surface at a molecular level. She walked toward it. The snow crunched under her boots. Her breath plumed in front of her, and the moisture froze on her balaclava. When she got close, she stopped and stared. The antenna was melted. Not the entire mast, just the top 4 feet. The aluminum had sagged and drooped like candle wax, material that should be rigid and structural now hanging in smooth, organic curves that spoke of extreme heat applied with extraordinary precision. The antenna element itself, a thin rod that should have been perfectly straight, was bent at an unnatural angle, and the tip was rounded, smooth, like it had been dipped in something molten and then allowed to cool in open air. She pulled off her glove and reached up to touch the metal. It was cold. Not warm. Not even ambient temperature. Colder than the surrounding air. A metallic cold that stuck to her bare skin with an adhesion that felt almost intentional, as though the metal were reaching back. She pulled her glove on and stepped back. The mast should not look like this. Aluminum doesn't melt at these temperatures. It doesn't sag or droop or behave like wax. The melting point of aluminum is over 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Even if something had heated the metal to that temperature, there would be evidence. Scorch marks on the snow, steam, meltwater, some visible trace of heat transfer in the surrounding environment. But the snow around the base of the mast was untouched. Smooth. Flat. As if nothing had happened. As if the aluminum had melted itself. Spontaneously, silently, leaving no trace of the process that deformed it. She turned and scanned the horizon. Flat white tundra in every direction. No lights. No movement. No tracks. Just empty space and the gray sky pressing down like a lid on a container that held nothing but cold and silence. She went back inside. The antennas melted, she said. The station technician looked up from his computer. What? The top of the mast. The aluminum is melted. Looks like someone held a torch to it. He stood and walked to the door. She followed him outside. They stood together in the cold and looked at the mast. The drooping metal, the bent element, the smooth rounded tip that should have been sharp and straight. The station technician didn't say anything for a long time. Then he walked toward it. The meteorologist stayed by the building and watched. He circled the mast, crouched, examined the base, stood and touched the metal. Then he came back. That's not possible, he said. I know. There's no heat source out here. No equipment that could do that. And even if there were, the snow would show it. I know. They went back inside. The station technician pulled up the weather logs on his computer, temperature readings from the tower for the past 24 hours. Nothing unusual. Steady cold. No spikes. No anomalies. The data showed exactly what you'd expect for late January in the Arctic. Could it be old damage? The station technician asked. Something that happened before we got here? No, the meteorologist said. I checked the mast on January 12th. It was fine. He rubbed his face, the gesture of a man processing information that doesn't fit into any framework he possesses. Okay. So something melted the antenna between January 12th and today. In sub-zero temperatures. With no heat source. And no sign of heat transfer. That's correct. They sat in silence. The generator hummed. The wind rattled the door. The station technician opened the station journal and wrote down the observation. Antenna mast damaged. Top section melted. Cause unknown. He dated it and signed it. We should report this, he said. Agreed. At 1800, they called Dead Horse. The meteorologist explained the situation. Damaged antenna, unknown cause, request for guidance. The operator on the other end listened with the patient detachment of someone who processes field reports all day. "Can you still transmit?" the operator asked. The meteorologist glanced at the radio. They were currently talking to him through the antenna in question. "We're talking to you right now." "Then you're fine. Log it. Take photos. Submit a maintenance request. Someone will come out in the next few days to assess it." They signed off. The meteorologist and the station technician looked at each other. The institutional response to an impossibility: log it and wait. "That's it," the station technician said. "That's it." The rest of the evening was quiet. They ate a simple meal, freeze-dried stew and crackers, the cuisine of isolation. The meteorologist did some reading. The station technician worked on his laptop. Neither of them talked about the antenna or the radio. The subjects sat between them like objects too heavy to lift. At 21:30, the meteorologist went to bed. At 0113, the radio turned on again. She heard the click. Sharp, clear, unmistakable. Her eyes opened in the dark. She lay still in her bunk and listened. The carrier wave static hissed, the familiar background noise of the emergency frequency. Then the voice. "We are not cold." Same voice, same tone, same 4 words, same flat, mechanical precision, as though the message were being replayed rather than spoken, transmitted by something that had memorized the sentence without understanding what it meant. She sat up and pulled the curtain aside. The station technician was already in the main room, standing by the radio in his thermal underwear, his breath visible in the cold air of the station. "Same message," he said. "I heard." He grabbed the mic. "Who is this? Identify yourself." The static cut out. Dead air, the frequency emptied of everything, even the background noise that should have been constant. The station technician tried again. No response. He checked the settings. Everything was normal. The power switch was in the on position. The frequency showed 121.5. The volume was where it had been. "We need to turn it off physically," the meteorologist said. "See if it happens again." The station technician nodded. He reached over and flipped the switch to off. The power light went dark. The static stopped. They stood in silence and waited. 5 minutes passed. The switch stayed off. No click. No voice. Just the wind pressing against the walls and the generator maintaining its eternal hum. "We should stay up," the meteorologist said. "See if it happens again." They pulled chairs over to the workbench and sat facing the radio. 2 people in a small room at the edge of the world, watching a piece of equipment the way you'd watch a door you expect something to come through. The station technician made coffee. They drank it slowly, cupping the warmth in their hands, and watched the power switch. The building creaked. The wind pushed against the walls. The meteorologist's eyes felt heavy, but she forced them to stay open. The darkness outside the windows was absolute. Not the darkness of a city night, which always carries some ambient glow, but the true darkness of the Arctic winter, the kind that has weight and texture and presses against the glass like something sentient. At 0147, the meteorologist saw movement outside the window. Not a shape. Not a figure. Just light. A pale blue glow that swept across the snow beyond the glass, moving slowly, left to right, like a searchlight scanning the tundra from an invisible source. But the light didn't have a beam. It didn't radiate from a point. It just existed, a band of blue luminescence approximately 6 feet wide, moving steadily across the frozen surface with the patient deliberation of something searching. "Look," she said quietly. The station technician turned and saw it. They both stood and moved to the window. The blue light continued its sweep. It passed over the weather tower without pausing. It continued east, steady, measured, unhurried. When it reached the antenna mast, it stopped. The glow intensified. It wrapped around the base of the mast and climbed, ascending the aluminum pole with the slow, purposeful motion of something that knew exactly where it was going. When it reached the melted section at the top, the metal began to glow. Not red, like heated steel. White. Bright enough that the meteorologist had to squint. Bright enough to cast sharp shadows across the snow in every direction. Bright enough to transform the dark tundra around the station into a landscape of harsh light and absolute dark. The glow held for maybe 3 seconds. Then it released, the light detaching from the mast and continuing its sweep eastward, moving past the building and out toward the horizon. The glow faded. The tundra went dark again. The antenna mast stood as it had before, melted, damaged, dark. The meteorologist looked at the station technician. His face was pale in the dim light of the station. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "Yeah." Behind them, the radio clicked on. They both turned. The power light was glowing. The switch was in the on position. The carrier wave static hissed through the speaker, and then the voice. "We are not cold." The station technician reached for the mic. His hand shook, a visible tremor that he couldn't control and didn't try to hide. "Who are you? What do you want?" The static cut. A pause, longer this time, as though whatever was transmitting was considering the question. Then the voice came again. Different words. "The sky is open. Silence. No static. No carrier wave. Just dead air," the frequency sealed shut as cleanly as a door closing. The station technician and the meteorologist stared at the radio. The power light continued to glow. The silence continued to press. Outside the windows, the tundra was dark again, flat, featureless, empty. No blue light. No glow. Just the frozen surface of the earth extending in every direction toward horizons they couldn't see. The meteorologist felt cold, not the physical cold of the station's interior, which was manageable, but a deeper cold. The kind that settles in the chest and doesn't respond to warmth. The kind that comes from understanding that something has changed and will not change back. The sky is open. She didn't know what that meant. But she knew, with the certainty of someone standing at a threshold they didn't choose to approach, that they were about to find out. "We need to leave," the station technician said. His voice was tight, compressed by something beyond cold. "Now." The meteorologist nodded. She grabbed the satellite phone from the charging dock and moved toward the window to get a signal. As she did, the blue light returned. This time it didn't sweep. It dropped from directly above the building and spread across the snow in a circle around the station. A ring of blue luminescence that enclosed them completely, pressing against the windows like water against glass. The light was so bright she couldn't see beyond it. The tundra, the horizon, the sky, all of it erased by radiance that had no visible source and no boundary she could identify. And inside that light, she heard a sound. Not a hum. Not a vibration. A tone, low, constant, sourceless. It came from everywhere at once, from the walls and the floor and the air itself, and it made her teeth ache. The walls of the building shook. Coffee cups rattled on the shelf. The station technician grabbed the edge of the workbench to steady himself. The tone climbed in pitch. The meteorologist's vision blurred. She tried to dial the satellite phone, but her fingers wouldn't work. The fine motor control required to press numbered buttons had been stolen by something that operated below the level of conscious interference. The numbers on the screen doubled and swam. The station technician shouted something, but she couldn't hear him over the sound. And then it stopped. The light cut out. The tone vanished. The building went still, instantly, completely, as though someone had pressed a button and restored the world to its default state. The meteorologist blinked hard. Her vision cleared. The station technician was on the floor, breathing hard. The radio was off. The power light was dark. The switch was in the off position. She looked out the window. The tundra was black. The stars were there. The horizon was a straight line. Everything looked normal. But she knew it wasn't. "We're leaving," she said. "Now." They packed in under 10 minutes. Emergency bags, food, water, a tent, sleeping bags, portable stove, extra fuel. Flares. The satellite phone. She grabbed the station journal and the laptop with the data logs. The station technician pulled on his parka and boots and loaded the bags by the door. They kept a single snowmobile in the fuel shed for emergencies. Old, but reliable. The station technician had checked it 3 days prior. Full tank, good battery. It would get them to Dead Horse if they pushed it. The satellite phone worked this time. She dialed the emergency contact for Dead Horse operations. It rang 4 times. Dead Horse Ops. This is Point Lonely Station. We're evacuating. Immediate extraction requested. A pause. Say again. We're evacuating the station. We need pickup as soon as possible. What's your emergency? She looked at the station technician. What could she say? The radio turns itself on. A light circled the building. I heard a voice that said the sky is open. Equipment failure and environmental hazard, she said. We're not safe to remain on site. Copy. Stand by. The line went quiet. Then, Point Lonely, we can have a bird in the air at first light. That's approximately 0930. Can you hold until then? It was 0203. More than 7 hours. Negative. We're leaving now. Snowmobile to Dead Horse. ETA approximately 4 hours. Understood. We'll have a warming hut ready. Report when you're 10 miles out. They stepped outside. The sky was clear. The stars were so bright they looked close enough to touch. Hard, white, indifferent. The Milky Way stretched overhead in a dense band. No aurora. No glow. The wind had died completely. It was still, the kind of stillness that feels wrong in the Arctic, where the wind is as constant as gravity. They pulled the tarp off the snowmobile, loaded the bags, and the station technician primed the engine. It caught on the second pull. White exhaust plumed in the cold air. The meteorologist climbed on behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and he opened the throttle. They rolled out of the shed and accelerated southeast toward Dead Horse. The ride was rough. The tundra looks smooth but conceals rocks and ice ridges that jar the suspension. The station technician kept the speed around 30 miles per hour, fast enough to cover ground, slow enough to avoid hitting something hidden. The engine noise drowned everything else. The meteorologist kept her head down and tried not to think about what they'd left behind. After about 20 minutes, the station technician slowed. She lifted her head and looked over his shoulder. A blue light. Small. Distant. Sitting on the horizon directly in their path. It didn't move. It didn't pulse. It just sat there like a star that had fallen to the ground. They stopped. The engine idled. What is that? The station technician asked. I don't know. Should we go around it? The light was directly southeast. Dead Horse was southeast. Going around meant adding distance and time. And there was no guarantee the light wouldn't follow. Keep going, the meteorologist said. Straight line. If it moves, we react. They accelerated. The light grew larger as they approached, resolving into a shape. Not a point but a sphere, hovering about 3 feet above the snow. Pale blue. Bright enough to cast shadows. No sound. No heat shimmer. Just light. At 10 yards, the station technician stopped. They sat on the idling snowmobile and stared. The sphere was maybe 2 feet in diameter. Perfectly round. The light it emitted was steady and cold. Not like a bulb, more like something that existed as its own justification. Inside, the meteorologist could see structure. Thin lines of darker blue that moved slowly, like veins forming and reforming. It made her eyes hurt to look at it. Should we touch it? The station technician asked. No. Then what? Go around. Wide berth. He turned the handlebars and they veered left, giving the sphere 50 yards of clearance. As they passed, the meteorologist kept her eyes on it. It didn't move. It didn't react. It just sat there, glowing in the dark, They cleared it, and the station technician brought them back on course. The meteorologist looked back. The sphere was still there, a small blue point in the blackness. Then it blinked out. 1 second, present. The next second, gone. They kept moving. 10 minutes passed. The meteorologist began to relax. Then the handheld radio in her pocket crackled. She'd grabbed a portable VHF from the station before they left. She pulled it out. The screen showed 121.5. She didn't remember turning it on. Static hissed. Then the voice, male, calm. "We are not cold." She keyed the mic. "Who is this?" No response. Then a different voice, female, same flat tone. "The sky is open." Her stomach tightened. Then both voices at once, overlapping, speaking in unison. "You are seen." The radio went dead. Signal strength showed 0, as though the transmission originated from somewhere the equipment couldn't measure. Ahead, the horizon glowed. Not blue this time. White. A band of light stretched from north to south as far as she could see, pulsing slowly. Bright, dim, like something breathing. The station technician stopped the snowmobile. "We can't go through that. We have to. Dead Horse is on the other side. What if it's not safe?" She looked at the glow. Maybe 2 miles ahead. Behind them, nothing but the station and whatever had circled it. "We don't have a choice." They accelerated toward it. The glow brightened. The pulsing quickened. At half a mile, the temperature dropped, a sudden cold that went deeper than the air, deeper than clothing could address. Frost formed on the inside of her balaclava. She had to pull it down to breathe. At a quarter mile, the light became a wall. Not a band. A wall, vertical, stretching upward into the sky with no visible top. It just kept going until it faded into the blackness overhead. The pulse was fast now, almost constant. The ground ahead glowed white. They stopped 20 yards from it. "We can't go through that," the station technician said. "Then we go around. North or south?" He looked both ways. The wall extended in both directions without end. "How far?" "I don't know." The radio crackled. Male voice. "Come. Turn back. The path is closed." She keyed the mic. "Who are you?" "Turn back. The path is closed. We need to get to Dead Horse." "Turn back." The transmission ended. They chose north, riding parallel to the wall, the pulsing light steady on their right. After 10 minutes, 15, the wall didn't end. Just an infinite vertical plane of white dividing the world. Then a shape appeared ahead. Dark. Solid. As they approached, it resolved into a structure, a metal tripod about 8 feet tall with a platform at the top. On the platform sat a device, rectangular, black, smooth, no lights, no markings. They stopped 30 feet away and stared. The device didn't move. Didn't make sound. The meteorologist took a photo with the satellite phone. The image captured clearly, tripod, device, the white wall in the background. "Keep moving," she said. As they passed, the device on top rotated, smooth, slow. It tracked them. When they were out of range, it returned to its original position. "It saw us," the station technician said. After another 20 minutes, the meteorologist checked the GPS. Her stomach dropped. In over an hour and a half at 30 miles per hour, they'd covered only 8 miles. The dot marking Dead Horse was still 40 miles away. "That's not possible," the station technician said. "Something's wrong with time or distance or both. We're burning fuel and going nowhere." She made the decision. "We have to try the wall." "Are you serious?" "We can't go around. We're not making progress. Half the fuel is gone. We try or we freeze." He didn't argue. He turned the snowmobile toward the wall and they faced it head on. The light pulsed, white, bright, blinding. "Ready?" he asked. "No. But do it anyway." He opened the throttle. They accelerated toward the wall. The light grew brighter. The cold dug deeper. The meteorologist pressed her face against the station technician's back and wrapped her arms tight. They hit the wall. There was no impact. No resistance. They passed through like passing through water. For a moment, everything was white. Pure, silent, total. She couldn't hear the engine. Couldn't hear the wind. Her body felt weightless, disconnected, like floating in a space that had no direction. Then they were through. The tundra was dark again. Stars overhead. Engine roaring. The station technician slowed and stopped. The wall was behind them now, on the other side. Their position had jumped. They were 15 miles from Point Lonely. 7 miles closer to Dead Horse. Passing through the wall had moved them forward in space. They rode the remaining distance without incident. After another hour, lights appeared on the horizon. Yellow, steady, artificial. Dead Horse. The station technician brought them to the operations building and killed the engine. A man in a heavy parka stepped out. "You two look like hell. Get inside. Coffee's hot." They sat in the warming hut, hands wrapped around mugs, parkas hanging by the door. The man who'd greeted them, the operations foreman, had been with the oil company for 15 years. He looked at them with the calm concern of someone accustomed to cold weather emergencies. "So what happened out there?" he asked. The meteorologist looked at the station technician. He looked back. "Equipment failure at the station," she said. "And some environmental anomalies." Anomalies. Lights. Strange readings. "We didn't feel safe staying." "What kind of lights?" She hesitated. "How do you explain a blue sphere hovering above the snow? A wall of white light across the horizon? A radio that speaks in voices that shouldn't exist?" "We don't know," she said. "But they didn't behave like anything natural." The operations foreman leaned back. "You're not the first people to report weird things out here." That surprised her. "What do you mean?" "People working the North Slope see stuff all the time. Lights in the sky. Strange sounds. Equipment acting up for no reason. Most folks don't talk about it because they don't want to sound crazy. But it happens. What do you think it is?" He shrugged. "Atmospheric effects, maybe. The aurora can do strange things. Or maybe it's something else. I don't know. And I don't spend time worrying about it. I just know that when people say they saw something out on the tundra at night, I believe them." They flew to Anchorage the next afternoon. A representative from NOAA, a man she'll call the agency liaison, met them at the airport and took them to a conference room. They walked him through everything. The radio. The antenna. The lights. The wall. The tripod. He listened without interrupting. When they finished, he set the report down. "This is quite a story. It's what happened. I'm not doubting you. But you understand how this reads." She did. The audio logs from the station were corrupted, just static, no voices, no transmissions. The data showed normal temperature readings and wind speeds. The only physical evidence was the melted antenna and their written account. A team was sent to Point Lonely. They found the station intact. Generator running. Equipment functional. The antenna was melted. Metallurgy confirmed extreme heat exposure. But the tripod was gone. The team searched a 5-mile radius. No structures. No devices. Nothing. "Whatever was there is gone now," the agency liaison told her. "Or dormant. Or waiting." 3 months later, the meteorologist received a call from another NOAA scientist, a woman who'd been assigned to Point Lonely for a spring rotation. The relief meteorologist asked about equipment issues. "The radio's been acting strange," the relief meteorologist said. "It turns on by itself. Always at the same time, 0113. The meteorologist felt her chest tighten. "Has it said anything?" A pause. "Said anything?" "No, just static." "Why?" Did you hear voices? Yes. We heard voices, and we saw lights, and we left because we didn't feel safe. She told her everything. The blue light, the wall, the voice. The relief meteorologist went quiet, then asked what she should do. If it speaks to you, don't respond, the meteorologist said. If you see lights, don't approach. If you feel unsafe, leave immediately. 2 weeks later, the relief meteorologist called again. Her voice was different, tight, shaking. Last night at 0113, the radio turned on. The voice came through. It said my name, just my name, 3 times. Then it went silent. The meteorologist went cold. The voice had never used names before. It had been generic, impersonal. Now it was addressing people directly. I went outside this morning, the relief meteorologist continued. The antennas melted again. Same as what happened to you. And there are marks in the snow, 3 circles, each about 6 feet across, perfectly round. They form a triangle around the station. The spacing is exact. 20 yards between each circle. The tripod. The 3 legs. The pattern was repeating. You need to leave, the meteorologist said. I know. But they won't send extraction until next week. Weather's bad. No flights. And I'm alone. My partner rotated out 3 days ago. That made everything worse. The meteorologist and the station technician had each other. The relief meteorologist was alone at Point Lonely with whatever was circling the station. Pack emergency supplies, the meteorologist said. Keep the snowmobile fueled. If anything else happens, anything, you leave immediately. Don't call for clearance. Just go. And keep your satellite phone on you at all times. That night, the meteorologist couldn't sleep. She lay in her apartment checking her phone. At the time that corresponded to 0113 Alaska time, she sat up in bed and waited. Her phone rang at 0213 Mountain time. It happened again, the relief meteorologist said. Her voice shook. But it was different. The radio said, "We see you." Then the lights came. 3 blue spheres, 1 at each circle. They rose from the snow and they're hovering about 10 feet off the ground. They're still there. I can see them from the window. Don't go outside. I won't. Do you have the snowmobile keys? Yes. In my pocket. If those spheres move toward the building, you run. They stayed on the phone. Minutes passed. The relief meteorologist described what she was seeing. The 3 spheres holding position, the temperature dropping inside the station, frost forming on the windows despite the heater running. Then, they're moving. Not toward the building, toward each other. They're converging at the center of the triangle. The meteorologist heard the fear spike in her voice. They're merging. The 3 spheres are coming together. They're forming something. Oh God, it's huge. Describe it. It's not a sphere anymore. It's a column. Vertical. Maybe 30 feet tall. The light is white now. Brighter than before. I can't look at it directly. The meteorologist's mind raced. The column. The wall. This was how it started. The spheres merged, became something larger. Something that could manipulate space. That could create barriers. That could make distance meaningless. You need to get out now. Go out the back door. Circle wide around the column. Get to the fuel shed. What if it follows me? It will. But you'll be moving. If you stay there, you're trapped. A pause. Breathing. The sound of a decision being made. Okay. I'm going. The meteorologist heard movement. Chair scraping, parka rustling, zipper, the creak of the door opening. Wind rushed in. The connection crackled. I'm outside, the relief meteorologist whispered. Keep moving. It's so bright. The whole tundra is lit up. Focus on the fuel shed. Running footsteps in snow. Gasping breaths. Then a stumble, a grunt. more running. It's turning, the relief meteorologist panted. The column, it's rotating. Following me. The top is tilting toward me. Like it's looking at me. Run. The phone filled with wind and gasping. Then new sounds, padlock rattling, shed door creaking. I'm at the shed. Start the snowmobile. Fumbling. Keys jingling. Starter cord, once, twice. The engine didn't catch. A curse. Another pull. The engine roared to life. I've got it. I'm going. Engine noise. Wind. Acceleration. The column is still there, the relief meteorologist shouted. But it's not following. It's just standing in the center of the triangle. Keep going. Don't look back. For 20 minutes, the meteorologist stayed on the line. Brief updates, 5 miles out, 10 miles. The column shrinking behind her. At 15 miles, it blinked out. I think I'm okay, the relief meteorologist said. Her voice was raw. Keep going. All the way to Dead Horse. 2 hours later. I made it. I'm at Dead Horse. They're getting me on a flight out this morning. Good. I'm never going back there. Never. I know. Neither am I. The meteorologist called the agency liaison and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. We'll send a team, he said. Don't send anyone alone. If you send people back to that station, send them in pairs at minimum. A week later, the update came. The team had reached Point Lonely. The station was intact. The antenna was melted again. The 3 circles were visible in the snow, partially filled by wind. No column. No spheres. No tripod. The radio functioned normally during their 3-day stay. No voices. No transmissions. What does that mean? The meteorologist asked. It means whatever was there is gone now. Or dormant. Or waiting. New protocols were implemented. No solo rotations, minimum 2-person teams, mandatory daily check-ins, emergency extraction procedures, additional monitoring equipment. Whether any of it would help, no one could say. The meteorologist took a transfer to a station in Montana. Lower elevation. Warmer climate. No tundra. No endless horizons. Just mountains and forests and sky that felt smaller, safer, more human in scale. The station technician moved to Seattle. They exchange messages a few times a year. How are you? I'm good. How's the weather? Normal. They don't talk about Point Lonely. They don't have to. They both know what happened. They both know it was real. Sometimes at night, the meteorologist wakes at 0113. She doesn't know why. Her body just knows the time. She lies in bed and listens to the silence. She listens for the click of a radio turning on. For the hiss of static. For a voice that says, "We are not cold." It never comes. But she's still listening. She thinks about what the voice said. The sky is open. You are seen. She thinks about the wall of light and the way it pulsed like something breathing. She thinks about the tripod and the device that tracked them. She thinks about the way distance didn't work and time didn't work and the GPS showed they were barely moving even though they'd been riding for over an hour. She doesn't have answers. She doesn't have proof beyond the melted antenna and corrupted audio files. All she has is the memory of standing in a small research station on the tundra and watching a blue light sweep across the snow. All she has is the feeling of passing through a wall of white light and feeling weightless, disconnected, like crossing from one space into another. Point Lonely is still operational. Crews rotate through every few months. The antenna was replaced. The radio functions normally during the day. What happens at night, whether the voices still come at 0113, whether the blue light still sweeps the snow, whether the wall still rises on the southeast horizon, the meteorologist doesn't know. She could find out. She could call the agency liaison. She could check the maintenance logs. But she won't. Because some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left closed. What she knows is this: something exists on the north slope that we don't understand. It uses light. It manipulates space and time. It communicates through radios even when they're turned off. And it sees us. It knows we're there. The sky is open. Open to what? Open for what? Is it a door, a passage, a boundary that's been crossed? She doesn't have answers. Just the certainty that on January 27th, something reached out and touched a research station on the tundra. It melted an antenna with heat that left no trace. It turned on a radio at 0113 and spoke 4 words. It showed them lights and walls and a tripod with a device that watched them pass. And then it let them go. That's the part that keeps her up at night. Not that it happened. Not that they saw it. But that it let them go. It had them. It controlled the space around them. It could have stopped them from leaving. But it didn't. It let them ride through the wall. It let them reach Dead Horse. It let them fly to Anchorage and go home. Why? She doesn't know. And maybe that's the most unsettling answer of all. I'm a paramedic with the Alaska State Troopers Remote Emergency Response Team. For the past 9 years, I've worked rotations in the interior and North Slope, responding to medical emergencies in areas where the nearest hospital can be 200 miles away. Most of my calls are routine: hunting accidents, heart attacks, hypothermia. You stabilize the patient, load them into a plane or helicopter, and get them to Fairbanks or Anchorage. The work is straightforward if you stay calm and follow protocol. I'm 37. I grew up in rural Maine, so isolation doesn't bother me. I'm good in emergencies. I don't panic. I assess, act, and adapt. Those qualities have kept people alive in situations where minutes matter and help is hours away. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened on February 8th near the Colville River Delta. I was stationed in Dead Horse that week, covering for another medic on family leave. My partner was a wilderness EMT, I'll call the wilderness EMT. He'd been working the North Slope for 6 years, 42 years old, quiet, competent, built like someone who splits firewood for recreation. He grew up in Montana and moved to Alaska after his divorce. We'd worked together before. He's reliable. That matters when you're 80 miles from the nearest backup. The call came in at 16:47. A construction crew working pipeline maintenance near Umiat reported a worker with chest pain and shortness of breath. Possible cardiac event. The foreman said the man was stable but needed transport. We loaded the trauma kit, oxygen, and cardiac monitoring equipment into our tracked vehicle. A Tucker Snowcat, old but reliable, built for Arctic conditions. Heavy, slow, but capable of punching through deep snow. The wilderness EMT drove. I handled navigation and radio. Temperature, -34 Fahrenheit. Winds at 12 knots. Clear skies. The route took us southwest along a service road paralleling the pipeline, then south on a winter trail through low hills. We expected to reach the camp in about 3 hours. 40 minutes in, the aurora appeared. Green curtains across the northern sky. Normal. Beautiful. The wilderness EMT glanced up and nodded. We'd both seen it hundreds of times. At 18:23, the radio crackled. The foreman, his voice tight. Our guy's getting worse. Heart rate climbing. How far out are you? Approximately 40 miles. ETA 1 hour 40 minutes. Please advise if you can move faster. The wilderness EMT pushed the throttle forward. Every minute mattered. At 18:51, the aurora intensified. The green bands brightened and began to pulse. Fast, faster than either of us had ever seen. The light strobed across the snow. Then a column of white light dropped from directly above. Not green. White. Solid. It hit the snow maybe 100 yards ahead and spread into a circle. The light was sharp-edged, no diffusion, no scatter. A cylinder of solid white anchored between sky and earth. The wilderness EMT slammed the brakes. What the hell is that? The column held for 5 seconds. Then it snapped off. Gone. The aurora returned to normal. The snow was undisturbed, no glow, no residue, no evidence. Aurora effect? The wilderness EMT asked. I've never seen the aurora do that. We continued. At 1917, the GPS started jumping. Our position 3 miles east, then back, then 5 miles west. Altitude cycling between 200 and 1400 feet on flat ground. Dead reckoning, the wilderness EMT said. We stay on the trail and follow the compass. At 1934, the trail split. 2 sets of vehicle tracks diverged, one straight, one veering left toward a low rise. There shouldn't have been a split. The trail was a single route. Straight, I said. Stay on course. At 1947, the tracks ended. Not faded. Not buried by wind. Ended, clean, like the vehicle that made them had lifted off the ground. The wilderness EMT stopped. We climbed out and examined the termination point. Deep tracks, recently made, then nothing. The snow ahead was smooth and untouched. Could they have turned around? I asked. Not without leaving marks. You can't turn a snowcat without leaving a curve in the tracks. We kept going by compass, breaking fresh snow. The GPS remained unstable. The radio was silent. No chatter, no weather updates, just dead air. At 2008, I saw something ahead. A shape on the snow. Dark. Low. 12 o'clock. Something's there. The headlights resolved it into a vehicle. A bombardier, an older tracked model painted red. Engine off. Lights dark. Motionless. We stopped 20 feet away. I grabbed the radio. Unidentified vehicle ahead. This is Alaska State Troopers' medical response. Do you need assistance? No response. We stepped out. The cold wrapped around us immediately. I walked to the cab and shone my flashlight through the window. Empty. Door unlocked. Keys in the ignition. The engine cranked but wouldn't start. Fuel gauge showed half a tank. The wilderness EMT called me to the back. He was looking at the snow. Footprints, 2 sets leading away from the vehicle toward the southeast. Deep prints in heavy boots. Clear and fresh. How long ago? I asked. Hard to say. Could be an hour, could be 3. Wind's been calm. The prints led toward a low ridge about a quarter mile away. Beyond that, darkness. We follow them, I said. What about our call? The guy at Umiat. I checked my watch. 2014. We were supposed to arrive by 2030. We were off course with no GPS and a dead radio. But someone had abandoned this vehicle and walked into the Arctic night. That's not something you do unless you're in trouble. I tried the radio. Static on every frequency. No carrier wave. Nothing. Radio's out. We can't call for backup. And someone's out here on foot. We geared up, heavy parkas, headlamps, emergency packs, trauma kit on my back, flare gun in the wilderness EMT's pack. We locked our snowcat and started walking. The prints were easy to follow. Deep, evenly spaced. Whoever made them was heavy or carrying weight. We moved steadily, not fast. In the Arctic night, rushing is how you twist an ankle or fall into a hidden drainage. The aurora pulsed overhead, brighter than before. Green light reflected off the snow, giving everything a faint, spectral glow. At 2037, we reached the ridge. The prints climbed the slope and disappeared over the crest. We stopped and caught our breath, the cold air burning in our lungs. We climbed. The snow was deeper on the slope. By the time we crested, my thighs were burning. I scanned the area below with my headlamp. The land dropped into a shallow bowl, maybe 100 yards across. Flat bottom, low sides. And in the center, standing alone on the snow, was a figure. My heart jumped. The wilderness EMT saw it too. We stood on the ridge and stared. The figure was motionless. Humanoid shape, arms at its sides, facing away from us. It wore what looked like a dark parka, but something about the proportions was wrong. The arms hung too low. The head was too large. "Hello!" the wilderness EMT shouted. His voice carried across the bowl. "Do you need help?" No movement. No response. "Could be hypothermic," I said. "Altered mental status. Approach carefully." We descended. The prints led straight to the figure. As we got closer, I could see more detail. The parka was black, no reflective strips, no patches. The posture was rigid. Too rigid. Not the posture of someone standing still. The posture of something that had been placed. At 20 yards, I stopped. "Sir, ma'am, we're with Alaska State Troopers Medical Response. We're here to help." Nothing. The figure stood like a monument. The wilderness EMT circled left to get a different angle. "Can you hear me?" Still nothing. I took another step forward. 15 yards. My headlamp hit the figure square on. It wasn't a person. The shape was wrong. The proportions were inhuman. The arms were too thin. The legs were too straight. Perfect cylinders, no joints, no feet. And the head, which I'd thought was large, wasn't a head at all. It was a smooth dome. Featureless. No face. No hair. No openings of any kind. Just a curved, reflective surface like polished metal. I stopped breathing. The wilderness EMT raised his flashlight. The beam illuminated the figure fully. It was a suit, or something like a suit. Black material that looked seamless. No zippers, no seams, no gloves or boots. One continuous piece covering a frame that didn't have human proportions. The arms ended in points. No hands. The legs were straight cylinders. And the dome where a head should be was smooth and reflective, catching our lights and throwing back distorted images of ourselves staring at something we couldn't categorize. "What is that?" the wilderness EMT whispered. "I don't know." Behind the suit, pressed into the snow, were the same footprints we'd been following. They led right up to where the suit stood, and then stopped. No prints leading away. No sign that whoever wore the suit had removed it. The tracks just ended at the suit's location. I circled to the front. The dome reflected my headlamp beam. I could see my own distorted face in the surface, stretched, warped, staring back with an expression I barely recognized. No face underneath. No person. Just emptiness. "Look at the snow," the wilderness EMT said. I stepped back and looked down. The suit stood on the surface, but it wasn't sinking. My boots were ankle deep. His were the same. The suit's legs touched the snow but left no impression. No weight. As though it were hollow. Or as though whatever filled it didn't obey gravity the way matter is supposed to. The wilderness EMT reached out slowly and touched the suit's arm with a gloved finger. The material didn't give. Rigid. He pressed harder. Still rigid. He rapped his knuckle against it. The sound was dull, solid, not fabric, not cloth. Metal or composite. Something engineered. I crouched and examined where the suit met the snow. A faint discoloration, a ring of darker snow about 2 feet in diameter around the base. I pulled off my glove and touched it. Warm. The snow was warm. "The snow's warm," I said. The wilderness EMT crouched beside me. He felt it. That's not possible. But it was. The snow was warmer than the surrounding area. Not melting, just warm. As though something beneath or within the suit was generating heat that radiated outward in a controlled circle. I stood and backed away. My mind raced through frameworks that couldn't contain what I was looking at. Someone had walked out here in heavy boots. The tracks led to this suit. The tracks stopped. The suit stood here, weightless, rigid, warm. And inside the reflective dome, nothing looked back. "We need to call this in," I said. The wilderness EMT pulled the radio from his pack. "Static on every frequency." He cycled through them all. Dead air. I looked around the bowl. The ridges surrounded us. The aurora pulsed overhead. And in the center, the black suit stood like a sentinel, silent, still, waiting for something we couldn't identify. "We should go," the wilderness EMT said. "Back to the snowcat." Agreed. We backed away from the suit, keeping our lights on it. It didn't move. We climbed out of the bowl and reached the ridge. I looked back one more time. The suit was still there, a dark shape against white snow. And above it, the aurora had split into 3 distinct bands, all directly overhead, all pulsing in unison. We turned and followed our own tracks back. The cold bit at my face. My legs ached. I wanted to be back in the snowcat. I wanted the radio to work. I wanted to be anywhere but here. At 21:09, we saw lights ahead. Not our snowcat. Blue. Hovering above the snow. 3 spheres, beach ball-sized, floating motionless about 10 feet up, positioned between us and where we'd left the vehicles. They cast long shadows across the snow. The wilderness EMT stopped. Not again. The spheres began to move, circling each other, forming a triangle, then spreading into a line. Low, deliberate, controlled. Then one by one, they descended. They touched the snow and sank into it, not melting through, just sinking, like the snow was water. Within seconds, they were gone. We reached the snowcat at 21:34. Both vehicles sat dark under the stars. We climbed in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The warm air from the heater felt like salvation. "Let's go," I said. The wilderness EMT turned us southwest, following the compass. At 21:47, the radio crackled, the handheld clipped to my belt. The same flat, emotionless voice. "Turn back. You are not cleared." I grabbed the mic. "Who is this?" "Turn back. You are not cleared." "This is Alaska State Troopers' medical response. We have an emergency call." No response. Just static. Then, "Turn back." "We keep going," I said. The wilderness EMT pushed the throttle forward. At 21:52, a column of white light dropped directly ahead, the same solid, vertical cylinder we'd seen earlier. It hit the snow 50 yards out and spread into a perfect circle. And from within the light, something emerged. The shape was hard to see clearly, not because it was dim but because it didn't hold still. It shifted, changed. One second it looked like a person standing upright. The next second it was wider, lower, like something on 4 legs. My eyes couldn't lock onto it. The outline kept slipping, a form that refused to resolve into anything recognizable. The wilderness EMT threw the snowcat into reverse. The shape moved toward us, not walking, gliding. Closed the distance too fast. He shifted forward and cranked the wheel hard. The tracks spun. We lurched sideways. The column snapped off. The shape stopped. The tundra went dark. We sat in the idling snowcat and waited. Nothing. The shape was gone. The wilderness EMT chose east, away from everything. He opened the throttle. At 22:08, we crested a rise and saw lights. Yellow. Steady. Artificial. A work camp. We pulled in. A man in a parka knocked on the window. "You guys lost. We're Alaska State Troopers' medical response. We got off course. Can we use your radio?" I called Deadhorse on the satellite phone. They were confused. We were 60 miles east of our intended route. Impossible, given our departure time and speed. "What about the Umiat call?" I asked. "We'll dispatch another team." At 22:16, I asked the question that had been forming since the lights appeared. "Can you confirm, did Deadhorse dispatch 2 teams to Umiat tonight?" The operator checked. "Negative. We dispatched you by ground at 16:47, and a helicopter team at 16:52. "Who requested the helicopter?" "The foreman at Umiat." And who requested the ground transport? A pause. Also logged as Umiat Camp. But, that's strange. 2 separate calls, 5 minutes apart. I contacted the foreman directly. He'd only called once, at 16:52, requesting a helicopter because the patient was deteriorating. He never requested ground transport. The first call, the one that sent us into the tundra at the exact time and place to encounter the red bombardier, the footprints, the suit, had come from somewhere else. Someone or something had faked a dispatch call on Umiat's frequency to put us on that specific route at that specific time. We'd been lured out there. Deliberately. Precisely. The call was traced the following day. It hadn't originated from Umiat Camp. It came from a location approximately 43 miles southeast of Deadhorse. Middle of nowhere. No registered facilities. No radio towers. Nothing. Close to where we'd found the red bombardier. Close to where the suit stood in its bowl of warm snow. The red bombardier was traced to a pipeline maintenance company operating out of Prudhoe Bay. It was assigned to a worker, a site supervisor who'd been reported missing 3 days before we found his vehicle. He'd gone out alone to check a relay station 40 miles south of Deadhorse. He never arrived. His radio went silent at approximately 18:30 on the night he left. Search teams found nothing. No tracks. No wreckage. No sign of mechanical failure along his route. Now they had his vehicle. 60 miles from where it should have been, with keys in the ignition and fuel in the tank. And footprints, 2 sets, leading to a bowl in the tundra where a black suit stood on warm snow. 2 sets of prints. 1 vehicle. 1 missing man. The math didn't add up. The paramedic told the investigators exactly what she'd found: the abandoned bombardier, the tracks, the suit, the dome, the warm snow, the blue spheres. They listened with the strained patience of people trying to reconcile testimony with reality. A search team was dispatched to the bowl the following morning. They found it easily enough, the coordinates matched. But the suit was gone. The snow where it had stood was undisturbed. No impressions. No warmth. No footprints. What they did find were 3 circles, burned into the snow in a triangle formation around the center of the bowl. Each circle approximately 6 feet across. Perfectly round. The spacing between them was exactly 20 yards. The snow within each circle was discolored, darker, as though heat had been applied from below, melting the surface layer and then allowing it to refreeze into a glassy crust. The same pattern the relief meteorologist had found at Point Lonely. The same geometry. The same precision. The site supervisor was never found. His family was told he'd been lost to exposure, a plausible explanation in a region where the cold kills efficiently and the landscape swallows the evidence. His personal effects were collected from the Prudhoe Bay camp. Among them, a small journal, the kind you'd buy at a gas station, spiral-bound, lined pages. Most of it was mundane: shift schedules, equipment notes, phone numbers. The last 3 pages were different. Drawings. Simple. Rough. Made with a ballpoint pen pressed hard enough to score the paper. Triangles. Circles. Lines radiating from central points. And in the margin of the final page, a sentence written in block letters. They watch from the line. Do not cross. No context. No explanation. No indication of when it was written or what had prompted it. Just a warning from a man who'd driven his bombardier into the tundra and never come back. The paramedic and the wilderness EMT were debriefed at Deadhorse by state troopers, a representative from the pipeline company, and a man who introduced himself only as the lead researcher. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't military. His credentials identified him as affiliated with a federal research program. No specific agency, no department name. Just a title and a badge that opened doors. The lead researcher was in his late 50s, silver hair, reading glasses, the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where classified information was discussed as casually as weather. He didn't take notes. He listened. When the paramedic finished her account, he leaned forward. The suit you described, the dome, was the surface reflective or matte? Reflective, she said. Like polished metal. And the arms, you said they ended in points. Were the points symmetrical? She thought. Yes. Both sides the same. And the snow beneath it. You said warm. How warm? Could you estimate? Maybe 40 degrees. Warmer than your hand would expect. He nodded. You're describing something we've been tracking. The room went quiet. The state trooper shifted in his chair. The pipeline representative looked uncomfortable. What do you mean, tracking? The paramedic asked. The lead researcher opened a folder he'd brought. Inside were photographs, satellite images, thermal scans. He spread them across the table. Over the past 4 months, we've documented a series of incidents across the North Slope. All during winter. All involving light phenomena, radio interference, and physical evidence that doesn't match any known natural process. He pointed to a thermal image. A bright spot on an otherwise uniform dark field. This was taken 3 weeks ago. A heat signature in an area with no structures, no equipment, no human activity. It appeared for 14 minutes and then vanished. Another image. A satellite photograph showing 3 circles in the snow, the same geometry, the same spacing. This was taken near Point Lonely after a NOAA team reported anomalous activity at their research station. The paramedic felt the hair on her arms rise. You know about Point Lonely? We know about all of it, the lead researcher said. A contract pilot flying the Barrow route reported a white line in the aurora that tracked his aircraft and took control of his flight systems. A meteorologist at Point Lonely reported a radio that activated itself at 0113 every night and transmitted messages in a voice that didn't belong to any known source. And now you, a paramedic dispatched by a call that was never made, led to a vehicle that shouldn't have been there, following tracks to an object that defies classification. He looked at her steadily. 3 separate witnesses. 3 separate locations. The same phenomena. What is it? The wilderness EMT asked. We don't know, the lead researcher said. But it's not random. There's a pattern, geographic, temporal, behavioral. Whatever is operating in this region is consistent. It uses the same methods, the same frequencies, the same visual signatures. And it's been doing it for longer than any of us have been watching. He pulled out another document. The 1980s military report, the same one the contract pilot had found. The declassified account of a cargo aircraft paced by an unidentified object. Scorch marks on the fuselage. Radio failure. Crew advised to avoid discussion. This goes back at least 40 years, the lead researcher said. Probably longer. The indigenous communities in this region have oral histories that describe lights and sounds and presences that predate European contact by centuries. What does it want? The paramedic asked. We think it's territorial, the lead researcher said. The incidents cluster along a corridor, roughly following the Colville River Delta from the Brooks Range to the coast. The lights appear when people enter certain areas. The radio messages are consistent. Maintain heading, do not deviate, turn back, you are not cleared. They're warnings. Boundary enforcement. And the suit? The wilderness EMT said. What about the thing standing in the snow? The lead researcher hesitated. For the first time, his composure showed a crack. That's new. We haven't documented anything like that before. 2 days later, a second researcher arrived. The specialist had been flown in from Washington, younger than the lead researcher, sharper edges, less patience. Where the lead researcher listened, the specialist interrogated. The entity that emerged from the column of light, the specialist said. You said it shifted shape. That's correct, the paramedic said. Describe the shifting. One moment it looked like a person standing upright. The next it was wider, lower, like it went from 2 legs to 4. The outline kept changing. I couldn't focus on it. Could you estimate its size? Hard to say. Maybe 7 feet tall in the upright form. Wider in the other configuration. Did it make sound? No. Nothing. Did you feel anything? Temperature change? Pressure? Vibration? She thought. Cold. It got colder when the column appeared. And a feeling. Like being watched. But not from the entity. From everywhere. Like the air itself was paying attention. The specialist made notes in a leather-bound notebook. His handwriting was small and precise. The fake dispatch call, he said. You believe you were deliberately drawn to that location? Yes. Why? What purpose would that serve? I don't know. To show us something. To test us. To observe how we'd react. And the suit. Do you think it was placed there for you to find? The paramedic considered that. The footprints leading directly to it. The warm snow. The way the spheres appeared only after they'd approached. The voice on the radio telling them to turn back, but only after they'd seen what was there. Yes, she said. I think it was staged. The specialist closed his notebook. That's consistent with our assessment. A third figure entered the investigation. A man the paramedic would come to know as the security consultant. Former military, current contractor. He didn't care about the lights or the suit. He cared about the faked dispatch call. Someone accessed a secure radio frequency and impersonated a pipeline foreman to redirect a state trooper medical team, he said. That's not atmospheric interference. That's not an equipment glitch. That's intelligence. What kind of intelligence? The paramedic asked. The kind that understands our communication systems, our response protocols, and our patrol routes well enough to exploit them. He let that sit. The room absorbed it slowly. You're saying it studied us, the wilderness EMT said. I'm saying it knew exactly how to get you to drive to that specific location at that specific time. It knew the frequency. It knew the call signs. It knew what kind of emergency would guarantee a response. That requires observation, planning, understanding. The compiled briefing took place in a conference room at Prudhoe Bay. The lead researcher, the specialist, the security consultant, the state troopers, the pipeline representatives, the paramedic, and the wilderness EMT. On the table, photographs of scorch marks, melted antennas, 3 circle formations, thermal anomalies, satellite images, radio logs, and 3 separate witness accounts that described the same thing from 3 different perspectives. The lead researcher summarized. We have a phenomenon operating across a defined geographic corridor on the north slope. It manifests as light, white lines, blue spheres, columns, walls. It communicates via radio on standard frequencies using flat, emotionless voices. It can control aircraft systems, manipulate spatial perception, generate localized heat, and apparently fake radio transmissions to redirect personnel. Physical evidence includes metallic scorch marks, crystalline frost formations, and geometric patterns burned into snow. The phenomenon appears to enforce territorial boundaries and becomes more active when those boundaries are approached or crossed. He paused. And now we have a new element. A physical object, a suit or construct, placed at a location where it would be found by personnel who were deliberately guided there. This suggests a level of intentionality we haven't seen before. What do you recommend? The state trooper asked. Restricted access to the corridor. Enhanced monitoring. No solo travel. And continued observation. Whatever this is, it's been here longer than we have. We're not going to solve it in a week. The paramedic returned to Fairbanks. She wrote her report. She filed it with the state troopers and gave a copy to the lead researcher. She tried to resume normal life, shifts at the station, grocery shopping, sleep. The ordinary infrastructure of existence that's supposed to anchor you to the world. It didn't hold. 3 weeks after the incident, she woke at 0113. Not gradually, instantly. Eyes open, heart rate elevated, every nerve alert. She lay in bed in her apartment and stared at the ceiling. Outside, Fairbanks was quiet. Snow on the ground. Streetlights casting orange pools on the sidewalk. The clock on her nightstand read 1:13. She got up and walked to the kitchen. The radio on the counter, a small AM/FM she kept for weather reports, was on. She hadn't turned it on. The dial was set to a frequency she didn't recognize, not a station, not a channel. Just static. She stood in her kitchen in her bare feet, staring at the radio, and waited. The static cleared. "We see you." Her name. The voice said her name, not her title, not her call sign. Her actual name. Spoken in the same flat, emotionless tone. The same mechanical precision. As though the voice had followed her home from the tundra, and was now speaking to her through a cheap radio on a kitchen counter in Fairbanks, Alaska, 150 miles from the nearest point on the North Slope. She turned the radio off. Unplugged it. Sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall until the sun came up. The next morning, she called the Wilderness EMT. "Have you been waking up at 0113? She asked. A long pause. "Yeah. Every night for the past 2 weeks. Has your radio turned on?" Another pause. Longer. "My truck radio. Twice. Both times at 0113. Both times on a frequency I didn't set. Both times, static that clears into a voice." What did it say? My name. Then, "The sky is open." She closed her eyes. The same words the meteorologist had heard at Point Lonely. The same message, transmitted across distance and time, through radios that shouldn't be receiving, to people who'd been marked by an encounter they didn't choose. "It followed us home," she said. "Yeah. What do we do?" "I don't know. But I'm not going back up there. Whatever it is, whatever it wants, I'm done. I gave them my report. I told them what I saw. The rest is someone else's problem." She wanted to agree. She wanted to close the door and walk away and let the lead researcher and the specialist and the security consultant figure it out. But the voice had said her name. Not a title. Not a designation. Her name. It knew who she was. It knew where she lived. It could reach her through any radio, any frequency, any device that converted electromagnetic waves into sound. You can't close a door when the thing on the other side doesn't need doors. She called the lead researcher. "It's happening at my apartment," she said. "The radio." The voice. 0113. He didn't sound surprised. "You're the third person to report this. The contract pilot who flew the Barrow route, his truck radio has been activating. Same time. Same frequency pattern. And the meteorologist from Point Lonely. Her alarm clock radio. 3 witnesses. 3 separate locations. All experiencing the same phenomenon. How is that possible? We don't know. But the pattern is consistent. It targets individuals who've had direct encounters. It uses whatever radio equipment is available in their proximity. And it always activates at the same time. 0113. Correct. We don't know the significance of that timestamp. It could be arbitrary. It could correspond to something we don't understand yet. What should I do? Remove all radio-capable devices from your sleeping area. Document every occurrence. Note the exact time, the message content, and any other observations. And try to get some sleep. She almost laughed. Almost. The months that followed were not normal. The paramedic wants that understood clearly, not as a plea for sympathy but as a statement of fact. What happened on the North Slope did not end when she drove out of the tundra. It did not end when she filed her report. It did not end when she flew back to Fairbanks and locked her apartment door and tried to sleep in a bed that felt too still, in a room that felt too quiet, in a city that felt like a thin layer of civilization stretched over something vast and indifferent. The radio activations continued. Every night at 0113. She removed the kitchen radio. The voice came through her alarm clock. She removed the alarm clock. The voice came through her laptop speakers, the laptop that was closed, powered down, sitting on her desk like any other piece of dormant technology. She opened it. The audio application was active. The waveform showed a transmission. The voice was there, stored in the buffer like a voicemail from something that didn't use phones. She moved apartments. New building, new address, different part of town. 3 nights. Nothing. She slept, really slept, for the first time in weeks. On the 4th night, she woke at 0113. The smoke detector in the hallway was emitting a low, steady tone. Not an alarm. Not a chirp. A tone, the same frequency she'd heard at Point Lonely, the one that made her teeth ache and her vision blur. She opened the hallway door. The tone was coming from the detector mounted on the ceiling. She reached up and pulled the battery. The tone stopped. She stood in the hallway holding a 9-volt battery and listening to the silence. Then, from inside her neighbor's apartment, muffled but unmistakable, a voice. Coming through a baby monitor. The same flat, mechanical cadence. "We see you." She didn't knock on the door. She went back to her apartment and sat on the floor with her back against the wall. She understood something then that she'd been resisting since the night in the tundra. You cannot remove enough devices. You cannot move far enough. You cannot create sufficient distance between yourself and something that communicates through electromagnetic radiation in a world built on electromagnetic radiation. Every speaker, every wire, every circuit that converts signal to sound is a door. And there are doors everywhere. The lead researcher contacted her in April. He wanted to meet, not in a conference room, not in an office. A coffee shop in downtown Fairbanks. Neutral ground. Public space. As though even he needed the comfort of witnesses. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him. More gray. Deeper lines. The face of a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had recently been given more to carry. "How are you?" he asked. "Tired. It's still happening. I know. It's happening to all of you." He stirred his coffee. The cafe was warm, busy. Normal people having normal conversations about normal things. The distance between their world and hers felt astronomical. "I want to update you," he said. "You deserve to know what's been happening." She waited. The corridor has expanded. When we first mapped it, the active zone was approximately 80 miles long and 20 miles wide, following the Colville River from the Brooks Range to the coast. As of last month, it's over 140 miles. The southern boundary has shifted. New incidents are being reported further inland. What kind of incidents? The same. Lights. Radio interference. Equipment anomalies. But more frequent. And more direct. Direct how? He reached into his coat and produced a photograph. A satellite image. Thermal overlay. A bright point of heat in the middle of featureless tundra. And beside it, a shape. Dark. Humanoid. The same proportions the paramedic had seen in the bowl. 2 thin arms, cylindrical legs, smooth dome. "The suit has been seen again," the lead researcher said. A survey crew spotted it standing on the ice near the Sagavanirktok River. They photographed it from their helicopter before it disappeared. Not walked away. Not collapsed. Disappeared. One frame it's there. The next frame it's gone. When? 3 weeks ago. And there's something else. He set down another document. A missing persons report. A second pipeline worker, a different company, different camp, different route. He'd gone out to check a remote pump station and hadn't come back. His vehicle was found 8 miles from the station. Keys in the ignition. Fuel in the tank. Footprints leading southeast. Same pattern, the paramedic said. Exactly the same. Footprints leading to a location. No footprints leading away. And 3 circles burned into the snow at the terminus. She felt the cold again, the deep cold that lived in her chest now, the one that didn't respond to heaters or blankets or the warm cup in her hands. "You said it was territorial," she said. "That it was enforcing boundaries. That was our initial assessment. And now?" The lead researcher looked at his coffee. He didn't drink it. "Now we're not sure territorial is the right word. Territorial implies defense, protection of space. What we're seeing looks more like collection." The word hung between them. Collection. People going out, not coming back. Vehicles found abandoned. Footprints that end. The suit standing in the snow like a marker, or a replacement. "You think it's taking people," she said. "I think people are disappearing in areas where the phenomenon is active, and we can't find them. Whether they're being taken or whether they're going voluntarily, walking toward something they can't resist, I don't know. But the result is the same." "And the suit? What is it?" "We have theories. None of them are good. The most conservative is that it's a probe, a physical instrument placed in the environment to observe and collect data. The less conservative theory is that it's what's left." "Left of what?" He looked at her. The expression on his face was the most honest thing she'd ever seen from a man who dealt in classified information. "Left of the people who walked toward it." The cafe noise seemed to recede. The warmth seemed to drain from the room. The paramedic sat with that sentence and felt it settle into her like a stone dropping into still water. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have a right to know. And because we need to understand the 0113 transmissions. They're happening to every witness. The contract pilot. The meteorologist. The technician. Your partner. 5 people, all experiencing the same phenomenon at the same time every night. We don't know if it's monitoring you. We don't know if it's communicating. We don't know if it's preparing. Preparing for what? We don't know." She finished her coffee. It was cold. Everything was cold. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Keep documenting. Note every occurrence. If the messages change, if the voice says something new, contact me immediately. And if it escalates. If it's not just radios anymore." He didn't answer right away. He folded his hands on the table and looked at them, the hands of a scientist confronting the limits of science. "Then we'll cross that bridge. But I want you to know, we're watching this. We're taking it seriously. And we're not going to let it disappear into a filing cabinet." She believed him. She wasn't sure it mattered. The wilderness EMT stopped answering her calls in May. She tried 3 times. Voicemail. She sent messages. No response. She called his emergency contact, a brother in Montana. The brother said he was fine. He'd moved to a cabin outside Kalispell. No internet. No phone service. No radios. She understood. He'd done the only thing that made sense, removed himself from the grid. Gone somewhere with no speakers, no transmitters, no devices that could be hijacked by a voice from the tundra. Whether it worked, whether silence was enough to sever whatever connection had been established, she didn't know. She thought about doing the same thing. Selling everything. Moving to a cabin in the woods. Living without electricity, without technology, without the constant presence of devices that could become mouths for something that shouldn't have a voice. But she didn't. Because running felt like losing. And because the voice had said her name, not through a radio on the North Slope, not through institutional equipment in a research station, but through a baby monitor in a neighbor's apartment in Fairbanks. It knew where she was. It knew who she was. And distance didn't seem to matter. So she stayed. She kept working. She kept documenting. Every night at 0113, she woke. Sometimes the voice came. Sometimes it didn't. The messages varied now. Fragments, phrases, things that sounded almost like conversation but never quite resolved into meaning. "The corridor is open. We have been here. You were seen. You are known. She wrote them all down. She sent the logs to the lead researcher. He acknowledged receipt. He didn't offer interpretation. There was nothing to interpret, just data points in a pattern that nobody could read. This is where the accounts converge. This is where the three stories, told by three people who never met, who worked different jobs in different parts of the same vast, frozen region, become one story. And the story is this. Something exists on the north slope of Alaska. It has been there for a very long time, longer than the pipelines, longer than the research stations, longer than the military installations that dot the Arctic coast. The indigenous communities knew about it. They didn't name it. They didn't worship it. They simply acknowledged its presence and stayed out of its way. They understood something that took the rest of us 60 years of radar and satellites and classified reports to figure out. There are places that belong to something else, and the wise thing to do is leave them alone. We didn't leave them alone. We built roads and camps and stations in the corridor. We flew aircraft through its airspace. We sent people into its territory with radios and GPS and the quiet assumption that technology made us safe. And whatever lives there tolerated it. For a while. It watched. It waited. It let us pass. Then it stopped letting us pass. The contract pilot was the first to cross a line he didn't know existed. He flew the barrow route through a section of sky that something had claimed, and it showed him what lived there. The white line, the triangle, the dark shape that filled the sky and held his aircraft like a toy. It took control of his plane and then gave it back. It burned marks into his fuselage and let him land. It was a warning. This space is not yours. Do not return. He returned. It warned him again. Harder. Higher. The dark shape closer, the control more absolute, the marks deeper. He got the message. He stopped flying north. The meteorologist came next. She sat in a research station inside the corridor and recorded data that the phenomenon didn't want recorded. It spoke to her through a radio that shouldn't have been on. We are not cold. A statement of existence. A declaration that whatever lived on the North Slope was aware of itself, aware of her, aware of the equipment she used to measure a world that included things she couldn't measure. It melted her antenna. It circled her station with light. It built a wall across her escape route and made her pass through it. A test, maybe. Or a demonstration. We control the space. We control the distance. We decide who passes. The paramedic came last. She was drawn, deliberately, precisely, through a faked emergency call that exploited her training and her duty. Something studied how humans respond to crisis and used that knowledge to place her at a specific location at a specific time. It showed her the suit, the black construct standing in the snow, the dome reflecting her own face back at her, the warm ground beneath it. And then it showed her the column and the shape that shifted inside it. This is what we are. This is what we can become. Now you know. 3 encounters. 3 warnings. 3 sets of marks left on metal and snow, and the people who were there to see them. And then it followed them home. Every night. Through every radio, every speaker, every device capable of converting signal to sound. We see you. The sky is open. You are known. The same messages, repeated with the patience of something that has no concept of time because it has always been there and always will be. The lead researcher calls it a phenomenon. The specialist calls it an intelligence. The security consultant calls it a threat. The indigenous elders who've known about it for centuries don't call it anything. They just avoid the corridor and tell their children to do the same. The paramedic calls it what it is, something we weren't supposed to find. Something that was content to exist in the spaces between our roads and our flight paths and our research stations, watching us the way we watch weather, with interest but without urgency, until we got too close. Until we crossed a boundary we couldn't see. Until we entered a territory that was claimed before we had words to describe claiming. And now it knows our names. The contract pilot still flies the southeastern routes. He doesn't watch the aurora anymore. The scorch marks on that twin otter have been painted over, but the metal underneath is still warm to the touch. He wakes at 0113 every night. He doesn't check the radio anymore. He already knows what it will say. The meteorologist works in Montana. She took the transfer and never looked back. She's productive. She's respected. She does good work. And every night, the alarm clock she doesn't own, the one she threw away 3 times, is back on her nightstand in the morning, set to a frequency that doesn't exist, tuned to a voice that shouldn't be possible. The station technician is in Seattle. He doesn't talk about it. He changed his phone number. He deleted his social media. He's trying to disappear from the world because something in the world won't stop looking for him. The wilderness EMT is in a cabin in Montana. No electricity. No radios. No phones. Whether the silence holds, whether you can outrun something that uses the electromagnetic spectrum as a highway, nobody knows. The paramedic is still in Fairbanks. Still working. Still documenting. Every night at 0113, she wakes and listens. Sometimes the voice comes. Sometimes it doesn't. She stopped being afraid. Fear requires uncertainty, and there's nothing uncertain about her situation. Something on the North Slope knows her name, knows where she lives, and can reach her through any device in the modern world. That's not a mystery. That's a fact. And facts, however terrible, can be lived with. The corridor is still active. The lead researchers team monitors it with satellites, thermal sensors, and ground stations staffed by personnel who rotate out every 3 weeks because nobody lasts longer than that without starting to hear things. The suit has been seen 4 more times, always standing. Always in the same posture. Always in a bowl of warm snow surrounded by 3 circles. And always gone by the time anyone gets close enough to touch it. 2 more workers have disappeared along the corridor since February. Their vehicles were found. Their footprints led southeast. The footprints ended. No bodies. No explanation. Just empty snow and the 3 circles and the faint warmth that lingers in the ground like a memory of something that was there and isn't anymore. Or something that's still there, just deeper. Just below the surface. Just out of reach. The lead researcher told the paramedic one last thing at their meeting in April. She thinks about it every day. We've been assuming it's watching us the way a predator watches prey, he said. But I don't think that's right. Predators are efficient. They observe, they strike, they consume. This is different. It returns things. It lets people go. It leaves marks instead of taking lives. It communicates instead of attacking. Then what is it doing? He looked out the window at the Fairbanks skyline, the low buildings, the snow-covered streets, the ordinary world going about its ordinary business. I think it's introducing itself, he said. Slowly, carefully, on its own terms. And I think the introductions are getting more personal. We are not cold. The sky is open. You are seen. You are known. 3 messages. 3 stages. An announcement of existence. A declaration of access. And a confirmation of contact. Whatever comes next, whatever the 4th message is, whatever it means when the introductions are finished and the thing on the North Slope decides it's time to move beyond observation and into something else, the paramedic will be listening. Not because she wants to. Not because she's brave. Because she doesn't have a choice. The voice knows her name. The sky is open. And whatever opened it isn't going to close it again. Some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Some presences, once felt, do not leave. The North Slope is still there. The corridor is still active. The lights still appear in the aurora when the temperature drops below -30 and the sky goes dark and the wind stops and the silence becomes something you can feel pressing against your skin. And at 0113, every night, in apartments and cabins and houses scattered across Alaska and Montana, and places that should be too far away for any signal to reach, radios turn on. Speakers crackle. Voices emerge from static. Not human. Not machine. Something else. Something patient. Something that has been watching the corridor for longer than we've been a species, and has finally decided, for reasons we cannot guess and may never understand, to let us know it's there. The sky is open, and through it, something is looking down. If these accounts resonated with you, if they kept you listening, kept you thinking, kept you looking at the sky a little differently, then consider supporting this work. Subscribe. Leave your thoughts below. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Because wherever you are, the sky is above you. And you never really know what's watching from inside it.